All right, good evening to you all, and welcome to the Monday, February 25th, 2019 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We are delighted you're all here with us this evening. I would ask if you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
That one's hot. Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder said he is not here because of work-related travel to a UN conference on sustainable development. Mr. Z?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. All right, so do we have a motion regarding a meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we have a meeting agenda. We have a very special proclamation this evening, and everyone on council wanted to be a part of that, so we're actually going to jointly read a proclamation honoring Gary Laporta, who was an integral member of our community and will be sorely missed. But we're going to go ahead and each take a turn at this. So I think we're starting with you, Mr. Lickenhouse. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas with the passing of Gary Laporta on February 10th, 2019, the City of Falls Church lost a champion for the city, a loyal friend, a good neighbor, and a bright light in the lives of many. And whereas Gary, who served as the outreach coordinator for the city's Commissioner of Revenue, will be remembered at City Hall for his humor and his love of the city.
And whereas Gary served in the United States Army and was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and whereas following the war, Gary moved to Northern Virginia to work for AT&T, and he and his wife owned Miniatures from the Attic, a cherished small business located in the city of Falls Church.
And whereas Gary spent countless hours in service to the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce as its chairman, a member of the board of directors and numerous committees, and as the MC at its annual gala. And whereas Gary was the recipient of the Chamber's 2018 Pillar of the Community Award and 2013 Commander Hap Day Memorial Appreciation Award.
And whereas Gary won the Acacia Bank Nice Guys Award in 2006 for hosting student field trips to his shop, and he was also the first recipient of the Falls Church City Public Schools Business and Education Partner of the Year Award in 2009. And whereas Gary also supported Creative Cauldron, the Falls Church League of Women Voters, and the Falls Church Police Department's participation in the Police Unity Tour, along with serving on a city task force on parking and towing, and on the city's Employee Advisory Council.
And whereas Gary was the incoming president of the Citizens for a Better City and was active in the Falls Church City Democratic Committee, and whereas Gary was predeceased by his beloved wife June, but will be dearly remembered by his daughter Connie, his family members, and by his huge contingent of friends. And
Gary's legacy lies in his service to his community and his country, and his contributions to the city of Falls Church are greatly appreciated. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, recognizes with great admiration and appreciation the contributions of Gary Laporta over the course of his life and career, and offers sincere condolences to his family. All right. Does anyone want to say anything else? There may be some folks in the community who would like to speak, and you're certainly welcome to as well. All right, Ms. Cole.
Yeah, hold on to me, please. Thank you all for that. I'm Sally Cole. I'm the director of the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you. As you all know, I believe we're hosting a Phil. we're hosting a community celebration for Gary on March 9th at 10:30 a.m. Everyone is invited. Thank you to Vice Mayor Connolly for serving on our planning committee for that, and also for agreeing to speak. Thank you to Mayor Tarter for agreeing to speak, and also to Mr. Shields for speaking at that event. It is a celebration, so we hope you all will be there. If anyone has any pictures or memorabilia, Gary memorabilia, that you'd like shared at that event, please contact me. And again, thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Would you like to have the resolution of the proclamation?
Yes, we'd be happy to give that to his daughter.
All right. Would anyone else like to say any words? I know there'll be opportunity.
Say one thing.
Of course.
Gary was always a friend to everybody. He did meet anybody that wasn't a friend of his, and he had such impact because he was available for anybody that was in need. And not only that, but he served in so many quiet ways. When he had his miniatures from the attic, he made a scale model of Cherry Hill so they could use, the Friends of Cherry Hill could use that as a fundraiser, and they made a lot of money on that raffle, which the board needed at the time. And I remember delivering it to Mary Carlfeld on Columbia Street, and that the wonder, that her daughter had for that, and I hope it's still there. And I'm going to check and see if it is, so I can get a picture of it. But there was always, Gary was ready to help, me with anything, and I can think of hundreds of things that I don't want to take the time here. But I just am really grateful that so many have come together to help with this March 9th celebration of Gary's life, and I hope that we have a lot of people come, because I think he's a great example of what it's to be part of a community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to say anything or add anything at this time? Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. I just wanted to note and thank the members of the Employee Advisory Council, and particularly Lonnie Marchetti and Jess Miller, who organized an event that was really at City Hall at 400 North Washington for employees. Employees have been grieving, and it was just a chance for employees to get together, tell stories together, and share their memories with Gary. And it was very therapeutic, I think, for employees to be able to do that. And so I just wanted to thank the EAC for putting that together as well.
All right. Thank you very much. To the next item, we also mourn the loss of a student at Falls Church City High School, or George Mason High School, but a lifelong Falls Church city student named Jeffrey Bandy, who passed away. He's much beloved. He was a student here in the city for his whole life, and we as a council and a community grieve with his family. And I would ask if we could just have a brief moment of silence. All right, thank you very much, and our condolences to his family and friends. Are there any oaths of office to administer, Madam Clerk?
I don't believe so. Nobody's here to take their oath of office? No, sir.
All right, let's move on to receipt of public comments. Do we want to start with the summary of written comments?
Certainly. Find them. Pieces of paper. Yes. Sorry, I'm looking for my summary, guys. I have a lot of paper here. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we had two comments, and I couldn't remember either of them, but I can now read them. Ann Miller of 320 North Van Buren Street wrote supporting allowing hedgehog, chinchilla, turtle, and hermit crab ownership in the city. And John Tepperman wrote with more information on fuel cell stations.
All right, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the receipt of public comment. If you would like to speak tonight, you're certainly most welcome to do so. We just ask that you fill out a speaker slip, which should be in the back of the room. And if you could state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes, we would certainly appreciate it. Our first speaker is Mort Dworkin, followed by Ben Brandy. Mr. Dworkin, are you here tonight? All right, that's sure. Mr. Bell?
Well, thank you very much for your time. I certainly won't take 3 minutes. I wanted to introduce some neighbors. There are 5 of us here tonight from South Spring Street. I live at 112. There are several other families that couldn't make it for any number of reasons, but as a group, we wanted to pose a few questions related to water management around our corner of the city, and we committed these questions to paper. I have a couple of copies that I provided, and then I'll defer to my neighbors to provide any elaboration that they'd like to. The primary question we had is around Founders Row. We can see that they're starting to channel out Broad Street and to put in some heavier gauge storm drains. We were wondering about where that water was going to be routed throughout the period of construction. And in particular, we've heard from a couple of folks associated with that project that it might be directed in toward the storm drain system that is kind of in South Spring toward the Boy Scout Lodge that many of you might know. So that's a question. We don't know for certain if that's the case. But each of the questions deals with sort of the evidence we've seen in the last 6 or 9 months of there just being things inundated with water. We know that 2018 was a record year for rainfall, but this seems to be something extraordinary, and we were just wondering if what the plan might be for Founders Row, and could that exacerbate existing problems. This is a question for further investigation by the right folks on your team, perhaps, but we also understand that historically there's sort of a culvert or a former historical stream that runs behind our properties on South Spring and the Fields of Falls Church apartment complex that was covered over at some point in time. And then also that apartment complex itself, it's the rainwater from that falls on the roofs there is kind of routed above ground toward lower lying houses on Spring Street. So you take all of those together and it's just a general expression of interest and potential concern that this might be a recurring problem that could create continuing property damage or issues that those of us on the street have to deal with. And we frequently see that storm drains are inundated in a heavy rain, whether that's on Allison Street or that's Spring Street or that's it. And then lastly, we've been working with, I don't know if she's here tonight, but working with your arborist who's been helpful about trying to get some dead trees removed from that area as well. I had a tree fall into my property a few years ago. Neighbors have had trees fall into theirs. We don't think that a human being is going to necessarily be standing under the tree, but certainly property damage. It's a public safety, building safety issue, I think. And the reason it's related to the other topics I mentioned is those trees are standing in what is turning out to be continually waterlogged soil. So they've been killed by English ivy for the most part, and so we're just concerned about making sure that public or building safety issue is addressed. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate yours. Mr. Shields, I want to ask you to respond to these, maybe not just yet. I'm going to let the rest of the neighbors speak. But if you could just be prepared in a moment or two to address some of the concerns I think you've heard and going to hear in the next couple of speakers, that would be helpful, I think. Our next speaker is Tim Rund. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Welcome.
I also live on Spring Street. I'm on 106 South Spring Street. The part that John was addressing is just that for the past few years, what we've started to realize is that the stormwater system on South Spring Street is pretty old and pretty dated. So most recently, the city was out repairing what appeared to be an old culvert that essentially was dead-ended. And there was about 8 feet of water that just kept flowing up onto the street. And so when they dug down and we took a look at it, really the culvert just ends and there's the other culvert is all packed up. So it's interesting. You have all these different flows of water, but no place for them to go. And so one of the things that's pretty clear is that Spring Street has a really antiquated stormwater system. And then the other part of it just is the fact that in the case of the apartments behind us, I don't think that there was a water management plan. It was built in the late 50s, and I suspect it was probably during the Fairfax County time. But really what ends up happening is that all that water just flows down onto all of our properties, and it's just something that we'd like to have a conversation about more than anything else. But we understand that there used to be a stream back there, and that like in a lot of cases in Falls Church, it was covered over. And that I don't think that they built any, I think they probably put a culvert in there, but I don't think that there's any drainage that feeds into it. And so if you live on Spring Street or if you live anywhere near it, when there's a heavy rain down near the Boy Scout hut, it just literally flows over across the street. It's like a river into the DeCero's yard. You could have a boat in there, you know. And so that's today. And so if indeed there's water coming from the new project And if there's other stuff, it's just, somebody needs to look at it, and we just didn't know where to ask or where to go. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Ben, is it Bundy? Brandy, I'm sorry.
I don't have much to add.
Sure, well, go ahead.
Certainly, 2018 was a record year, and we know that part of the problem was that. But even smaller storms like this weekend, we have standing water in our yard from Saturday, and still there even 36 hours after the rain has stopped. Standing water and even water still flowing into our yards. And so I think that's a concern, and partially, obviously, it's the record rainfall, but we are concerned about the water mitigation plan for the apartments behind us, because they just have downspouts at the point of the ground that flows downhill into our yards. And then I think moving forward, the Founders Row, not just what the mitigation plan is for the water from there, but the fact that just generally increasing non-permeable ground in the city is causing a problem because there's less area to be absorbed. It's actually a subject of an article in the Falls Church News Press recently that Arlington is seeing the same thing. The increases in commercial development and the increases in single-family home sizes, taking up larger portions of the lot, even with everything else, just that kind of increased area that is not permeable is causing a problem. And a lot of that can't be controlled. But we have specific concerns on Spring Street, but also kind of throughout the city as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Our next speaker, Mr. Dworkin, did you want to speak, or did they cover your topics already? Welcome.
Thank you. As Letty knows, I'm another South Spring Street resident at 108 South Spring Street. We used to have a beautiful, large fir tree in our front yard. And because of sodden soil and the accumulation of water, the tree started to lean to the point where we were advised that it would be smart to have the tree cut down rather than have it go into the power lines and cut off power to the street. So I just wanted to mention that it's not a recent problem. That's months ago. It's not recent rains. The water accumulation in South Spring Street, we know it's a spring street, but nonetheless, the accumulation near the surface has increased substantially. So we attribute it to other areas that are higher up, and one of those higher areas is Founders Row. The second thing I'd like to mention is the column in Falls Church News Press by Charlie Clark, our man in Arlington, from the 21st of February, goes over a complete series of reasons why water is accumulating and why it's a problem in this neighborhood he speaks of in Arlington. We could change the title of this column and put South Spring Street on it, and it would apply there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that's the last of our speakers on Spring Street. Mr. Shields, would you be able? Oh, we have one more? I'm sorry, I don't think you had a speaker slip in yet. Oh, okay, you got your speaker slip with you. All right, come on down.
My name is Kabir Kambo. I also live on South Spring. Thank you for your time. I'm not going to really add to what the other neighbors have said about Spring. I agree pretty much with everything they've had to say. One other item I wanted to bring up is the signaling for the crosswalks across Broad onto Spring. We need to see some improvement there a little bit in terms of the amount of signals or lighting that's there, because that's become a bit of a dangerous intersection for folks crossing. There are two crosswalks at the moment, but one of them has a little white logo for walk, but there's no real lighting or anything else to indicate to traffic that's going by that you should slow down or mind the intersection. So that was all I wanted to add.
All right, thank you very much. So, Mr. Shields, do you have anything to let people know in response to their concerns?
So thank you for raising these concerns. What I think might be helpful would be to have a meeting with the neighborhood, and we could meet there at the Scout House if they'll allow us to use that space, And we could start simply by sharing information. And I think we can learn from you about what you're experiencing. We can also bring the stormwater pipe maps that we have, the as-built plans that we have, so you can understand what the infrastructure is right now. And we can talk about its condition and what you're experiencing with it. With respect to Founders Row, there is a stormwater pipe that's being relocated, and that's the work that's happening right on the property line adjacent to St. James Church. They are not allowed to increase flows. And so that old development has no stormwater controls whatsoever today, and the new development will have stormwater detention and have stormwater controls. But we have to get through the whole construction process before they will be operational. But we can describe what that infrastructure is as well. The work that you see happening in the middle of Broad Street is actually sanitary sewer line upgrades, and that's being paid for by the developer as part of their overall infrastructure improvements. That's just a quick summary, but let's get together and we can share information and then plot a path forward from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shields. So I guess just to summarize, so what you're saying now is that the current circumstance, there really is not much in the way of controls and detention and the like, and they have to, the new Founders Row has to basically upgrade to the current regulations, which do require detention and all things like that.
That is correct. So post-development, the runoff from that site, from that 4.3 acre site, will be less than it is today. And that's as they come up to current standards. But that might not solve all the problems, so let's understand what's happening back there, and we can go from there.
All right. Our next and last speaker, at least at the present, I'm sorry, Ms. Hardy, sure.
As a fellow 100 block of South Spring resident, I'll just also add that, yes, it's been very wet on South Spring Street, but while we're talking about that Spring and Broad intersection, Mr. Shields, do we have line of sight to when that sanitary sewer work is done? Because that intersection has just been very messy during the day, especially between pedestrians crossing, people getting to St. James, and I know the neighborhood has been concerned about that too. Do we know how long that's going to last?
I don't have that schedule right before me right now, so let me get back with you on that. One other thing that is happening is the Mill Creek is hosting a neighborhood meeting that is principally geared at the Park Avenue, Grove Avenue, and Steeples Chase neighborhoods. And this will be an ongoing series of meetings that they'll have with neighbors about the construction process, just to give the neighbors a heads up as to what's coming. But we can also let the Spring Street folks know about that meeting. It's going to be on Wednesday, February 27th at 8:30 a.m., and it'll be on site right there at the construction trailer. And that is a great clearinghouse for neighbors to engage with Mill Creek, to talk about the construction, any issues, and also understand the schedule. And then from those meetings, we'll get information out that people can access it electronically as well.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question about the fields itself? Do we have any relationship with the folks who own the fields in terms of their runoff and their vegetation? It's not a concern that I've heard raised before, so.
It isn't one that I've heard before either, and so we'll need to research that. But I can't recall any engagement that the city's had with the Ellison Street apartments on stormwater issues.
I know when we did Berman Park, there was a lot of rain collecting issues there, and the park upgrade took that into account some, but that's been some number of years ago.
Yeah.
All right, I understand one of the speakers wanted to make a follow-up comment. You're certainly welcome to come forward and do so. I would just say in general, we like to have it one and done, and so if you keep it brief, we'd certainly appreciate it.
So part of the question about the crosswalks is that when you're going up Spring Street across Broad Street, there are crosswalks. There aren't any this way right here, and what's happening is that you're diverting kids now because they're closing down that street, that part of Broad. So we're diverting kids by Taco Bell and then bringing them down. The problem is that literally we're all running into this. As you're going across the street, people are just like walking right in front of you. There are no crosswalks here. If you go over by the temporary City Hall places on Columbia, you have these crosswalks that cross one part of the street, but they don't cross the other way. So we're just curious whether or not you're thinking about crosswalks that actually would warn kids. Like today, Mrs. Haynes, life and limb every day with all those construction trucks and everything else. She's doing an amazing job trying to direct kids. But now you got all these high school kids and others coming down the street, and there's no crosswalk, and they literally just walk out in front of cars and stuff. So thank you.
So, Mr. Shields, maybe you can take a look at that as well.
Yes.
All right, our next and last speaker, at least at the present, is Chief Mary Gavin. Welcome. And if anyone else would like to speak, now is the time to fill out your speaker slip.
Council, I just wanted to give you a friendly reminder about March 2nd, this Saturday. There is a dedication ribbon cutting for the new Firearms Training Center, which is located at the property yard, Fairfax City. I think a reminder has been put on your calendar by by Celeste. But essentially what it is the mayor's council, command staff of the police departments from Fairfax City, Falls Church, and George Mason University will all come together in celebration of a 5-year project for the new firing range, which is most impressive. So I welcome you. It starts at 10 o'clock and should go till about 12. There should be light refreshments and a tour. So I look forward to seeing you there, and thanks.
All right, thank you for your good work in getting that project accomplished, so we greatly appreciate it. All right, are there any other speakers that we have at this time? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to council requests. Oh, actually, we've got the annual report of the CACT. So are you all ready to come forward? And all right, come on down. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. I know most of you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. I'm Andrea Comont. I'm the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, and I'm here to present our 2018 report to council. I should say that there are many members of the CACT. I'm the chair. Our recently elected vice chair, Dave Gustafson, is in the audience behind me. Other members include Paul Baldino, Steve Knight, who's actually with us just one more month, Addison Hurd, Bill Ackerman, and Doug Devereaux. We're supported by Transportation Planner Jeff Sykes and Tara Puzin with the Department of Public Works. We'd really like to thank them for all their support. We'd also like to thank our City Council liaison Dave Snyder and Planning Commission liaison Melissa Teets for their guidance as well. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to serve the city, so I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in 2018, and then I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. So as always, the CACT continues to assist staff in implementing the neighborhood traffic calming program. We've been working on a few cases over the past year. These include both petitioned cases and administrative cases. Coming up in 2019, we hope to reevaluate the program again and perhaps make some tweaks to it to help it move more smoothly. We had a couple joint meetings this past year, one with the Environmental Sustainability Council, the ESC, on the topic of shuttle service, the potential for shuttle service in the city, and the current state of autonomous vehicles. And another with the Human Services Advisory Council to discuss accessibility issues in the city and transportation. We also made some recommendations on zoned residential permit parking. This is an issue that I think has been coming up more and more in the city as we've had more development. We made a recommendation for permit parking hours for Grove Avenue. And I'd just like to say that as we continue to implement new zoned residential permit parking programs to preserve on-street parking for residents, we'll really need to balance the need to provide enforcement for those restrictions when they're in effect, to include nights and weekends. My understanding is that those are really only enforced during the day currently. And we also need to really carefully consider how those proposed restrictions would impact the general public's access to amenities in the city, such as parks. For example, West End Park is located right next to the areas that would be restricted on Grove Avenue. We believe our streets are public spaces and that restrictions on public city streets should be implemented only when absolutely necessary. We wrote a letter to council supporting the completion of the sidewalk section on the north side of Park Avenue at Virginia Street. We're really excited that this is going to be happening. we are big believers in the idea that making small changes can have a big impact, and I think this is a prime example of a small project that will have a big impact, especially in the spring and summer. We were really excited to participate in Parking Day this year. I have to give a shout out to Akita, who did such an amazing job of planning this event, and we hope to help support the city staff in that event in the future. We also promoted Walk and Bike to School Day. We had some really great participation for that, so that's another event that we're hoping to continue to promote in 2019. We also participated in Bike to Work Day, which is runs seamlessly. Jeff Sykes does an amazing job managing that event for us. We wrote a letter of support to Novo Parks for their proposal to install a dual trail on the W&OD. We're really excited that this project is moving forward. I'd also like to compliment our city staff on procuring a grant to improve the roadway crossings on the W&OD. We are discussing currently the idea of potentially lowering speed limits in the city, and we hope to have a memo to council in the next month or two. Some other things that we worked on, the neighborhood pace car program. This is an idea that's been in the works for a few years now. We've obtained a $500 grant from VPAS to print some decals and pamphlets for this program. We hope to roll it out in the fall of 2019. The idea is that volunteers people will volunteer to sign a pledge to drive within the speed limit, to stop for pedestrians, to drive courteously, and they will display a pace car decal on their vehicles. And the idea is that they will set the pace for other cars driving in the city. We provided comments on the location for bike share stations. We're really excited to see this program roll out in the spring. And we also provided comments on development plans, including Founders Row and Broad and Washington. Looking ahead to 2019, we plan to administer, evaluate, and refine the NTC program. We'll be involved with the GMHS campus and West End projects. Our annual events, Walk and Bike to School Day, Parking Day. We also may try to put on at some point a bike rodeo event potentially. And there's talk of planning some sort of scavenger hunt potentially to showcase the city's trails and promote walkability in the city. We'd also started looking into making recommendations for improving lighting in the city. Some of the committee members have noticed that Falls Church can be quite dark in some places, and this impacts walkability because if people don't feel safe walking at night or in the evenings during the winter, they're not going to do it. So we hope to have a memo for council on that topic soon. So thank you, and I look forward to any questions or comments you might have. I'll take some notes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I know we all appreciate the good work you all are doing, and I think it's become one of the priorities of the city to improve walkability, bikeability, pedestrian access, and just really tie our community together without cars. So I think you've all done a very impressive job. I'm sure there's some questions from my colleagues, and Ms. Hardy seems to be nodding, so I think we'll start with her.
Thank you. I'll echo what the mayor said. Thank you for being so active and really at the forefront of kind of championing walkability and bikeability, which I think is really important to this council. Couple questions. On the neighborhood traffic calming, I was very excited to see that $800,000 grant, which we've talked about for a long time now, is coming up in fiscal year 2020. Do we have a sense of what projects those will fund? That's the first question. And then second, is it too early for us to start thinking about applying for the next round? So I think when we last applied for this was like 2 or 3 years away, and now the time's come upon us. Maybe we should think about the next round because we'll probably spend, the next 2 or 3 years using the $800,000, and then we want to make sure we have money waiting for us because I don't think traffic calming is going to be done in 2 or 3 years.
No, I don't think we'll get through all of it. I'd actually like to ask Jeff if he might be able to answer those questions. Our city staffers were the ones who made the applications for those grants, and I think we have a number of cases in the queue. As you know, we can only really manage 2 cases at one time. Those are for staff reasons. So I think currently right now we have the Gundry Drive area and also Little Falls, Great Falls. So Jeff, do you have anything to add?
And while Jeff comes up, let me clarify some of the financing money part for the CIP. FY20 is $638,000 that's already approved. And in FY 2022, staff have already applied for an additional $800,000. So every 2 years, we'll have a big infusion of federal money. And then in the out years of the proposed CIP that the Planning Commission has approved, and you'll see March 11th, we have some pay-go money put out in 24, 25, and then the next 4 years of the 10-year window. Specific projects, I'll defer to Jeff.
We have 2 projects in the works now, one of which is Little Falls, Great Falls. It's been kind of in hiatus for a while, but we're moving ahead. We're going to schedule a meeting the 19th of March with the community to begin the process again. We will likely be able to implement light solutions this summer on that project. The other project we're involved with is the Gundry Drive, Annandale Road project. We've done quite a bit over there in terms of the light solution. So we put in a number of crosswalks. We've addressed some of the issues by installing a flashing beacon at the stop sign and some other measures throughout the community. The next step is to move ahead with a larger project that would do things like narrow the intersection of Gundry Drive, make it a tighter intersection, reduce the crossing distances and that sort of thing, as well as bump out the curb in front of a big chimney park that was initially going to be part of that project but cost too much, but we're going to narrow the roadway in that area. The other projects that are kind of that I anticipate we would use some of the large amount of money for would be follow-up on Lincoln Avenue. As you may recall, we did the light solutions there. We ended up putting in some pedestrian refuge islands. When we collected data, speed data, both before and after, there was no change in the speeds. We were looking at something like 37 miles per hour on the 85th percentile, which is about the fastest that we've actually recorded that since I've been here, which has been about 4 years. So it's certainly some additional work needs to be done there. Not quite sure what it might entail, so we would again engage the community in developing what sort of solutions to look at. The other project would be Northwest Street from basically Lincoln Avenue to the city line. Of course, there's an intersection project at Great Falls and West Street that'll be done by Fairfax County, but we would tie into that and address some of the speed and pedestrian issues along West Street from, Great Falls Street to Lincoln Avenue and so on. So that's what I anticipate we will be looking at in terms of the construction or design. Hopefully we'll have enough money to be able to do all this.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that we're already thinking about money in the out years, because I imagine, like Jeff's already listed out all these projects, there's definitely no shortage of work to be done. So moving on to some other questions. On zone permit parking, I appreciate all the work that you guys did, because I know it's been tough to kind of come up with a solution that works for all neighborhoods. One thing that I kind of flagged to city staff is, besides our kind of Winter Hill parking program, and now we have a Grove and Park one, we have a bunch of old, just historical permit parking, or what we put signs up saying no parking here for various times. I'm not sure we're actually enforcing all of those. So one of the concerns I share with you is, how are we actually enforcing all of these? Is it consistent across the city? Should it be consistent, I guess, is the first question. And then a follow-up question for Mr. Shields, as I've raised with other parking issues in the past, is whether we need to think about additional enforcement dollars. Because if we're going to put up the signs and kind of assure neighbors that we're putting up parking programs, do we need additional enforcement, knowing that we're limited on resources there? So that's hopefully a budget conversation we can have next week. So maybe a question for the CACT is, do you all think that we should have a kind of more consistent, I guess, parking program across the city, or parking restrictions, or do some sort of rationalization with what's out there already?
I am all about consistency. As far as I can tell, the permit parking programs that are in place prior to the two recent ones were put in place over many years, probably for a variety of reasons. Maybe one resident's request, potentially. Who knows? And I don't know how well, or if at all, if they are enforced. From what I hear, just anecdotally from people who try to park around near, like to access the East Falls Church Metro, I don't know that they are in that location, but I could be wrong. Maybe Mr. Shields knows.
Well, I will say they are enforced, and typically the neighborhoods are very wedded to their existing regulation. So when we have tried to rationalize the system in the past, it has generally meant very full public hearing meetings with everybody saying, don't touch my parking regulation. And that's been our experience. We've actually tried it 3 times, and each time the council has heard the comments and said, why don't you find something else to do, city manager. And so that's just a little bit of history, but each one of these regs has come out through a petition process, and that's why I think the neighborhoods feel invested in them. And but we can continue to discuss it. But
And I'm not necessarily in the camp where I think we need to be consistent with all of them. I just want to make sure that they're actually going to be enforced. Because maybe there's a self-policing that's happening because people see the signs, they're like, oh, I better not park here because someone might ticket me. So maybe some of that's happening too.
Yep.
But having walked the city a lot, I know that there's at least like 3 or 4 different other programs out there beyond the ones.
yeah, we have a map that shows them all, and it's, you know,
It's
for anyone who
complicated.
likes order, it's very unsettling to see that
That's
map.
for me. So my third question, which I may be preempting Mr. Duncan, is on our scooters.
Yes.
So scooters are here in the city. I think that they're actually a great additional kind of, I guess, transportation option when we talk about multimodal. The only challenge, I think, is obviously it's kind of the Wild West, I think, for scooters right now. They operate on the sidewalks. Sometimes they operate on the streets. There's the helmet issue, which I know we've talked about before with Mr. Duncan. What are your thoughts on it? Because I know that different jurisdictions have taken different approaches.
I mean, personally, I'm a supporter of scooters. I like that they expand access to different kinds of people. People who might not want to ride a bike might be more comfortable riding a scooter. I think as far as, you know, getting people that last mile from the metro station home, they're great. But you're right that it is the Wild West right now. I'm glad to hear that Arlington is trying to come up with doing some pilot programs and trying to come up with some policies around them. I'm hopeful that we might be able to take some of what they're learning to create our own policies at some point. But I do think they have a place in the city. We are the little city, and I think the idea of being able to use a scooter to get around is appealing and should be. But they do need to be, they do need to be monitored in some way. We can't just have people parking them all over the place.
I could make a request maybe for city staff and maybe CACD to work in collaborations. I agree. This is, I think, a place where we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So maybe we can follow kind of what Arlington's doing with their pilot approach, kind of roll out with some kind of public safety, here's how to be a courteous scooter rider, kind of PR kind of things. But I think that they're here, and I don't think that we can
Ignore them.
They're here.
Right.
But maybe follow
I've seen
Arlington's
them
lead or other
around town.
jurisdictions so
Yeah.
that we don't have to come up with our own policy and rules for how to use them, because I think other people are doing that.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Licton? No?
I do.
All right, let's go for it then.
Looks like he's going to jump all over the microphone. Andrew, thank you very much. I think I said this last time you guys presented to us, but over the next 10 years, you guys may have one of the most important volunteer committees that this city hosts. So you guys have got quite a full plate. Just from a personal perspective, I live on Seton Lane, just around the corner from the elementary school, and I've seen just over the last year what seems to me to be increased cut-through traffic from Lee Highway to Broad. And so when I think about some of the developments that are coming, whether it's the West End project, but more specifically Founders Row, I've got this kind of vicious gut feeling that we're going to start to see more cut-through traffic for folks that want to get from the other side of Falls Church or from Lee Highway over to Founders Row, and then eventually to the West End project. And if Broad and Washington ever happens, cutting through there as well to avoid 66 or some of the other major throughways. So from a neighborhood traffic calming perspective, that's something that I've been more intensely focused on as I've noticed that higher volume of cut-through traffic. So personally, if there's anything that I can do to work with you all to address that and get out ahead of it, we spend a lot of time, and maybe it's just I've just taken a particular notice to it, but I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about traffic calming north of Broad, but not nearly as much south of Broad, especially around the elementary school there, with the amount of traffic that we get on our side streets. So that's something that's very important to me. I will also say that as it relates to scooters, I completely agree. But I continue to see scooters that seem to have been discarded in people's bushes on the side of the road, wherever people deem they feel fit to kind of toss those aside. So the idea of corralling and some planning around that would be good, so we don't all end up with bird scooters thrown in the front yard.
In our front yards,
yeah,
yes. That's the goal.
Yeah, a bird, lime, whatever it is. So anyway, thank you guys very much. Again, traffic calming for me, whether it's funding, if it's planning, if it's getting community support, especially on South of Broad, because I do have significant concerns about cut-through traffic as some of these new developments start to come out of the ground. I think that's going to be a stark reality for all of us. So whatever I can do to help there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
So first, I just would like to say I'm always happy to be preempted by Ms. Hardy and Mr. Litkenhouse. It makes my job much easier. I don't have to cover the same ground. So let me ask about a couple of down-in-the-weeds things. Jeff mentioned the project on Northwest Street, which this weekend, somebody who lives near that corner of Northwest and Great Falls asked about the crosswalk that was one of the light measures that was put in, and has it been removed, at least temporarily, because whoever lived in the house where the crosswalk dead-ended did not have any parking in front of their house? And you know what I'm talking about? Is there some resolution to that is in the works?
Jeff says it's been resolved.
Okay, well that's the kind of question I like to ask. So everybody's happy. Everybody's
You get
happy
results,
now.
Phil.
Yeah, I get results.
You mentioned it,
Thank you,
it's
Mr.
done,
Mayor.
man. That's the way it works.
He's my
He said happy.
He's my campaign. Yeah, has it been resolved? Are people happy with the resolution, or is that too much to ask? Okay, so the crosswalk has been restored in some form or fashion. Is that the bottom line? Yeah,
Jeff's coming up.
I'm gonna make Jeff get up one way or the other.
You
so.
should have just left it at early. It's been resolved.
You know me.
I know.
Story is that when we held the public meeting that was held in the old city hall, and I think you were there and a number of other people, the person who lived in that house where the crosswalk ended up was out of town. And when we put in, there was a lot of, as you're aware, there was a lot of interest in having a crossing or a crosswalk across West Street in that vicinity. So we ended up restricting parking in front of her house and actually did a crosswalk that went across the West Street at that location. When she came home from being out of the country, it was there. And we've made the commitment to her to remove that for a long time. And now that her house is for sale, she particularly wants it removed and so on. As I understand from riding by there, we have taken out the actual crosswalk as well as the hatching that was in front of her house. So it doesn't designate no parking. One of the things about it, though, we were going to put in another crosswalk on the other side of the street, on the other, more toward Great Falls, that would line up. And apparently we do have permission from the owner on the north side, west side, I guess, to actually put in that crosswalk. But there's some other work going on too. There's also at Oak Street, there's a Safe Routes to School project that apparently is in design, or it's very close to being worked on anyhow to improve that situation too, as I understand. So I think the lady who lives at 603 Northwest, which is the one you're talking about, is happy at this point. So.
But she's the one who's moving, right? I mean, it's good to make people happy when they move out of town, I guess. But I mean, I appreciate the detail and granularity here, and maybe we go into this in more detail in your. I mean, as somebody who lives in a property which has no parking in front of it because we have a stop sign, I'm moderately sympathetic to people who have no parking in front of their house, but not completely sympathetic. I mean, if the public safety benefit of the crosswalk is, determined to be, particularly as we look at the longer term solutions, then I would lean in that direction. But I'll leave it in your capable hands and the CACT's to, make sure that the broader community's concerns are addressed. Okay, thanks for that. The Virginia Avenue sidewalk, which we've talked about, that you knew that this had to get asked because this was going to be finished early in the year. Well, it's still early, but do we have a timetable for that?
Before spring is fully sprung. How about that?
Before spring is fully sprung. Okay.
Yeah, it's a question of getting the contractor there to do it. It's a very small job, and so our contractor has been hard to get there to do the job.
Okay. But wheels are turning. Could be June 20th if that's before summer springs officially. Okay, and the only other thing I wanted to bring up with the Falls Church, Jeff, thank you. You don't have to keep standing up.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. With Falls Church Gateway folks here, I would love for you all at CACT to try to work with them when the project comes before you all to look into an autonomous shuttle on what's being called the boulevard that runs from 7 through the project. When a number of us went over to Maryland last summer to see the Ollie autonomous shuttle there at National Landing or whatever that place is called. National Harbor, thank you. I thought that was an interesting project, and it seems to me that the boulevard that we're contemplating on the Falls Church Gateway project would be an ideal closed course, kind of not a whole lot of complications to get a shuttle that would run between 7 and the metro station eventually, once all the projects are knitted together. So that's one of those longer term things, but if we could begin planning for it now as we, work on that project, I think that'd be helpful. So I'd just like you all to discuss that when they come before
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Vice Mayor Connolly.
This may be more for Mr. Shields. Several people from Spring Street were talking about the problems of crossing Broad there at Spring, which kind of dovetails with the problem I always have with Lee Street and Broad Street, all in that same area. That doesn't fall in the purview of the CACT, does it?
It's certainly the CACT can advocate for it, but it wouldn't go through the neighborhood traffic calming program. That's actually the more accurate answer. It's not in the NTC. It is in the CACT's portfolio to recommend improvements like that, though.
So what I'm wondering is there are a number of intersections along Broad Street and along Washington Street that just aren't great. Is there a way the CACT can look at those in the coming year and either make recommendations or work with staff? I mean, I know there's money and the number of projects that can be handled, but it seems like as we're trying to encourage people to walk, some of those routes along Broad Street and Washington Street are really dangerous.
Are you thinking of for pedestrians crossing specifically or for drivers? Or
It's the combination of pedestrians and drivers. I mean, the Spring Street description you heard is people don't know when to go and when to stop, and the same thing happens at Lee and Broad. There's not really a walk signal, and it's difficult to cross, and people just run out in front of cars all the time.
Well, and the crosswalk there is sort of at a strange angle.
Right. It's not even that. That's not the problem, though. It's the same problem as Spring Street. It's crossing along the sides of Broad Street, just because it isn't it's just we've grown up and the intersections haven't grown up with us.
I do think that the lead pedestrian intervals that they've added to some of the lights in closer to the Harris Teeter have really helped a lot.
I think they have too,
because you get the
yes.
pedestrian out into the middle of the street before the traffic can go, which is, so maybe we could look at potentially adding more of those.
It seems like Spring Street and Oak Street are the two, and Spring and Lee are the two that are the most dangerous as you're crossing, because there is a light, so you think it's safer, but it really isn't.
Right. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right. I've just got a few thoughts. One, just again reiterating my thanks to you and the committee. I like your idea about the lighting. I think that's a good point that really isn't given much thought or much consideration or discussion, but I think lighting is absolutely critical to walkability, so I would encourage you all to continue down that path. Also, walking to school, I think in some ways is a missed opportunity. We are such a small community. I know there's some intersections that are a bit daunting. I walked my kids to school for 10 years, to all 4 schools, and I really enjoyed it. And I think a lot more folks could be walking than do so now. So I would certainly encourage you to work with the schools to find a way to get more kids out on their feet, and it's healthier, it's better for our community, it's better for the environment. I'd also agree with Ms. Connolly's comment, or more broadly so, just increasing crosswalks throughout the city. There are so many places, I think, that need a crosswalk or would benefit from a crosswalk that don't yet have them. And we're working hard, and I hope people can see how things have improved the past few years, but it's certainly been a priority of council, and I think will continue to be so. But I think crosswalks are an important part of the solution. And last, I would just say your work is of critical importance, not just to our community, but frankly to economic development. I think the increased emphasis on walkability and bikeability has added to the desirability of Falls Church as a place, as a destination, not just for residents, but for businesses. The Harris Teeter, for example, I walk to probably 5 times a week, but there are a ton of people that walk there. And I think it's great for Harris Teeter, but I think it's great for our community. So I think it's all tied together. But I appreciate the good work you all have done and look forward to hearing more about your efforts. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
All righty. All right, next item is council requests. Are there any council requests? Okay, let's move on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Just one thing to report. We are working to develop the budget and present it to you at your next meeting on March 11th. And the school board has adopted its budget request, which is within budget guidance adopted by the city council. The planning commission has taken action on the recommended CIP, so the pieces are starting to come together, and we look forward to March 11th. I have nothing else to report at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
We have TR 19-08, resolution to grant special exception entitlement for a mixed-use development project with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately 10.38 acres of land located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, portions of Real Property Code 51-221-001, on application by Falls Church Gateway Partners.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Aubrey, for your good work, and look forward to hearing what you have to say right now. Welcome.
Okay. Good evening, Council. Carly Aubrey with planning staff. I'm going to open with just background information and then talk about the review process and the schedule for the special exception entitlement. And then I'm going to turn it over to Akita Ruzi to talk about more details about the staff analysis that we've done so far. So the site description, the subject site consists of 3 parcels totaling approximately 34 acres and is located at the westernmost end of the city at the intersection of Leesburg Pike and Haycock Road. Surrounding land uses include the Virginia Tech and UVA Joint Campus, the West Falls Church Metro Station, the West End Shopping Center, and other commercial and residential uses. The area is surrounded on 3 sides by Fairfax County. The following actions have occurred on the subject site within the last few years. The subject came into the city as part of the 2013 Boundary Adjustment Agreement, and the stipulations of that agreement require that at least 70% of the acreage shall be used for school purposes and up to 30% may be used for any lawful purposes. In November 2017, Falls Church voters approved the issuance of up to $120 million in bonds for the construction of a new George Mason High School. And in January, a site plan application was filed for the new high school and is tentatively scheduled for Planning Commission final action on May 6. As part of the strategy for mitigating taxpayer costs for the new school, approximately 10 acres of the site are envisioned for private economic development. Recent land use and zoning map and text changes include, in January of 2018, we amended Chapter 4 of the Comprehensive Plan to create text for a special revitalization district for education and economic development and designated the site as parks and open space and also mixed use within a special revitalization district for education and economic development. In August of 2018, we amended the B2 zoning district to create new special exception provisions to provide additional flexibility in height and density needed to achieve significant mixed-use development and allow for by-right schools of up to 7 stories. In December of 2018, we amended the official zoning district map to change the zoning from R1A to B2. Between March and November of 2018, the city engaged in a request for proposals process in which the development team of Falls Church Gateway Partners was chosen. We have since entered into a interim agreement with the developer, and the interim agreement includes material terms. The most relevant to the special exception entitlement includes limits on the overall square footages and unit ranges for residential uses, and also includes minimums and ranges on square footages and also types of commercial uses. The proposed ranges and uses in the special exception entitlement application are consistent with those in the interim agreement. So the review and approval process for the land use entitlements consists of a special exception entitlement step followed by a special exception site plan. The current step, or the special exception entitlement, will govern building massing and height, density, uses, site layout, infrastructure, public facilities, parking, and general site circulation. The next step will be the special exception site plan process, the elements of which will comply with the SEE unless requested amendments are approved. And a SESP may be sought and approved for any and all phases identified in the SEE. The SESPs are reviewed against special exception criteria as well as requirements for site plans that are contained in the zoning code. And similar to the SEE process, the SESP will consist of referral by the council to boards and commissions, staff review and review by the planning commission and boards and commissions, and then approval by council. The timing for the SCE is first hearing and referral this evening, and then the first 2 weeks of March are set aside for boards and commission hearings through a set of group joint commission meetings, and that final schedule will be posted tomorrow on the West Falls Church project webpage. The Planning Commission is set to hear the application on April 1st to provide a mandatory recommendation to council, and the second hearing for City Council is scheduled for May 28th. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Akita Rousey, and then after her presentation, the applicant will have a presentation on the proposal. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Ruzi, welcome.
Good evening, Akita Ruzi with Planning. For my presentation, I'd like to just highlight some of the several items in the staff analysis section of the report that's before you tonight. As Ms. Aubrey mentioned in her presentation, the special exception entitlement will define land uses, height, transportation, public facilities, utilities, and infrastructure for the project. In accordance with the SEE review process, there are several items required for submission and review. Staff's preliminary analysis of those items is provided on page 8 of the staff report, and I'll just share some of the highlights again. So under the required elements, we have density. The comp plan determined that appropriate standards would include floor area ratios of 2.5 to 4.0 or higher, 1.2 to 1.5 million square feet or higher, and building heights that reflect the site's proximity to transit and transportation facilities. The total proposed gross floor area for the 2 phases of development is approximately 1.4 million square feet based on the special exception entitlement conceptual development plan. The resulting FAR is 3.7 based on the estimated acreage of the overall commercial development minus the shared above-ground parking garage. This is within the FAR discussed in the Special Revitalization District for Education and Economic Development in the comp plan. The second element is the uses. This is a proposed mixed-use development comprised of several buildings under a 2-phase development proposal. Phase 1 includes office, hotel, senior housing, condominiums, rental apartments, retail, civic, entertainment uses, and a large central open space. Phase 1 provides approximately 800,000 to 1.1 gross square feet of development, or 56% to 77% of the total proposed development. The third item is the building height. In terms of the building height, the proposed heights vary over the site, with tallest heights proposed at the Haycock and New Street B intersection and decreasing heights as the development approaches the school campus, with the exception of the senior housing at 11 stories. Up to 6 stories are shown adjacent to school for the proposed shared garage and a hotel building. Overall, the proposed heights are within the maximum height of 15 stories allowed under the special exception entitlement, and are generally consistent with the recommendations provided in the site-specific studies. Of particular is the 2017 Urban Design Guidelines. Details of massing architecture are subject to further staff review during the site plan phase, when more architectural details are available. In terms of the parking, a parking ratio tabulation for the overall parking is provided on page 12 of the SEE project booklet as the attachment 1. Applicant intends to request a parking reduction at special exception site plan. A draft TDM outline is also provided in the submission package subject to staff review and to be finalized at site plan. For fiscal impact analysis, preliminary annual net fiscal impact projections are provided on page 16 of the report. These are based on an estimated unit mix that is subject to change depending on the ultimate development plan that will be decided during site plan. Between $4.88 and $4.89 million per year is estimated as the probable range of net annual fiscal revenue when using current city school pupil ratio data per unit types. Between $4.44 and $4.49 million is estimated if the projected number of pupils using the school data are increased by 50%. Based on the preliminary review of the application materials, the planning staff has identified several key items to address during the SEE review process, and those include 1, hotel height and massing. The current proposal shows taller height of 6 stories for the entire hotel elevation at Block C along the school plaza. An earlier rendering during the RFDP process shows a step down at the middle of that elevation, which provided a lower height of 3 stories adjacent to the school plaza. This appears to be a new concept for further discussion. The second item is the alternate plan related to senior housing and office locations referenced in the current submission should be provided for city review and input. The third item is the placemaking and amenity plan. Staff needs more clarity on what this document will include to be able to determine the appropriate time for submission. The fourth item is the phasing plan and program summary sheet. The civic space square footage should be unbundled from the total retail. Additionally, the residential condo and the residential rental apartments should be broken out as well. The last and finally, the proposed timing of construction related to the different phases should be provided for review as well. At the work session last week, Council raised several questions and comments, and staff has provided responses to some of those items on page 4 of the staff report. Also included in this section of the report are items that will be further evaluated as part of the SEE review process and items that will be reviewed during the site plan process. Those actually appear in that category in your staff report. Tonight I'll just highlight some of the items that staff was able to provide a preliminary response to. So first of those questions, the enforcement mechanisms that can be placed on items such as square footages of retail and other uses. Staff's response on that item is that the material terms of IA that will be included in the final comprehensive agreement and commitments outlined in the SEE related to commercial square footage and residential units would become the binding elements of the development proposal. We also had a question on parking ratios and if the proposed parking is feasible based on recent mixed-use developments and ratios used near transit areas. Our response to that is that staff has requested additional information related to parking counts based on the city code requirements to be provided at SEE. Based on preliminary information provided by the applicant in terms of ratios and unit mix projections, it is estimated that there would be approximately 1,500 to 2,100 parking spaces provided. This represents an approximately 21 to 30% reduction in the parking code requirements. These numbers will continue to be updated as the project moves forward and detailed programming is refined. Additionally, staff will review mixed-use parking survey data conducted within the city, as well as transit-oriented development studies to determine if the ratios proposed in the SEE are sufficient. The third item was what can and can't change between the SEE and SE site plan. Once approved by council, at a minimum, the binding elements and the commitments outlined in the SEE related to density, height, uses, and parking ratios are not subject to change. The applicant, however, can seek an amendment to the approved special exception entitlement as provided in the code, subject to council approval. Additionally, the terms of IA and the comprehensive agreement would commit the applicant to elements contained in the SEE. And the last one, we had the specifics of Phase 2 related to timing of construction and certainty. The IA includes specifics related to uses and square footages. Phase 2, as described in that document, includes 2 development parcels, one planned for 154,000 square foot of residential condo building, and one planned for 265,000 square foot of office building. Conditions are included that if the developer and the city conclude that the office component is not viable, the developer can construct a residential condo after payment to the city. Additionally, at that point, the city may recapture the office parcel if the city and developer elect to construct only the condo parcel. With that, staff recommends City Council refer the application to appropriate city boards, commissions, and community organizations, and to schedule a public hearing and final consideration for the May 28th, 2019 public hearing date. And that concludes my presentation. Staff's happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll defer to the applicant for their presentation.
All right. Well, why don't we keep on? Mr. Duncan's got that look.
One quick question about the parking, 1,500 to 2,100, does that include the standalone garage?
Carly, do we have that in there? It would. The parking ratios we use it looks at the uses, what they're proposing, and that does include the parking garage and then also any underground parking.
Okay, so the standalone garage has a more fixed count, right? I mean, we've looked at that. What's that number, 700 or something?
700 to 800.
Yeah, so then we're talking about another, whatever that math works out to be, 15, 14, okay, so the total count is gonna be 1,500 to 20. Okay, thanks.
Oh, all right. Let's move on to the applicant. Come on down. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Appreciate you having us here. My name is Evan Goldman, for the record, from EYA, representing the team of EYA Regency and P. Hoffman. In the audience, we have David Lasso, our land use attorney. We have Karen and Antoinette from Walter Phillips, who you're probably all familiar with. And we have from P. Hoffman, both Andrea and Robin. From our team, Nate is on vacation today, or he would have been here from Regency as well. First, I just want to thank all of you, as well as staff, and Carly and Carol and Wyatt, and all the work you've been doing over the last years, and then specifically over the last few months on this project. We really appreciate it. Also, working with Dr. Noonan and the schools team has been really helpful. Everybody, we've been meeting probably 5-6 times a week on this project for the last 2 to 3 months, and a ton of community meetings as well, and it's been really helpful for us on refining the project that we propose to all of you. And so thank you. I'll start with a brief overview. We do have some slides. Many of you have seen this at this point, probably 7 or 8 times at different presentations. So, but I'm going to hit kind of the key highlights of what we've proposed. And then, of course, our entire team can answer any questions that you have. The first slide, if you just go to the next slide. There we go. This slide just shows the proposed project plan laid on top of the aerial of the West Falls Church area, including the county. And so what you can see from the slide is our site, or the city site, high school site, next to the Virginia Tech property, as well as the WMATA property, leading all the way up to the metro at the north corner. And so to some extent, this is why we're all here. You have an amazingly well-located piece of property that is walking distance to the metro. And we believe, in coordination with the Rush Marquette team and whatever WMATA ultimately does on their property, that this is going to create something really transformative on the west end of the city. It's going to do a few things. Number one, create an economic model that'll help you guys provide for the funding of your high school, which is really important to the city and the residents of the city. It creates a true powerhouse from a retail perspective, an anchor in the western part of the city where we can have regular events and create a center for this portion of the city's community. And then with that, also create a walkable, pedestrian-oriented, sustainable from an environmental perspective model where people that live in this community are going to be more likely to use transit. And then because of the bike networks and pedestrian networks and grid of streets that we're creating, we're unlocking auto capacity as well as bike and pedestrian capacity. And that will help residents, whether they live directly within our project or around our project, access Metro better. And all of that starts helping get people out of their cars and towards transit. So it's visionary. You guys were the visionaries and did most of the heavy lifting on this project, and we're really happy to be here with you today. The next slide. These are the images, the precedent images, which we initially had shared with the city. And what's great is over the last 6 months, these have not changed all that much, quite frankly. These were renderings we did in August over a 2-week period when we had to respond to the RFQ second request. And we've really tried as best as we can to hold to this. And so Once again, what you'll ultimately see in our SE application is largely a brick style of architecture fitting within the city. There'll be some modern elements and here and there. This really fantastic Commons Park space, which is the central design element of the entire project, and that's remained unchanged throughout. The civic building with music venue and other arts components right there on the upper right. The next image is that image again from inside the Commons, and we think ultimately in 4 years when we're all standing in that Commons at groundbreaking and we feel the sun on a beautiful day in this really cool park space that we'll have delivered to the city, hopefully everybody will feel like the time was worth it. So the next image is getting into the SE application, and as you heard from staff, the SE application is really probably 10,000 foot level, and then when we get into the site plan, we'll get down to 1,000 foot level over the next 18 months with all of you. And this is a blocking diagram that works really nicely for the site. Things may shift a little bit here and there over the next 18 to 24 months, but this is where we believe things will go. The organizing principles haven't really changed. The grocery store on the main block, Block A, at the bottom right. The retail Main Street located where it is because it's the flattest portion of the site and allows us to have outdoor cafes lining all of those retail frontages. The direction of that street geared towards the metro station to encourage walkability. And then the interaction between the school and the economic development project, both within the above grade parking deck and how we design that and wrap that in something fun and artistic, as well as the interaction between the high school plaza, the main plaza, and that hotel building. The next slide gets into a little bit of phasing, and once again, probably one of the greatest benefits of the project and the way we're designing it is that we're delivering so much of this up front. So, a 1 million square foot project is a big project for any jurisdiction in the country, quite frankly, maybe with the exception of Manhattan. And so having all that come in at once is what's going to ensure the success of the project. It's delivering the retail, delivering the sense of place, the placemaking, the mix of uses, being able to absorb all of that. And then you can see the phase 2 components are quite small for the future, and that construction will hopefully not be too much of a problem long term. The second part of it, you can see how we're interacting with the school, and that school drop-off will be built as part of our project or our project with you. And then you can see the interaction of how we're going to coordinate the bike lanes with the high schools, their site plan. The next slide shows the ground level plan. And in this, what you're seeing is that almost all the ground level spaces are retail, which is red, or orange, which is the grocery store, so that as you're walking along the frontage on Route 7 or any portion of that main street, it's active and alive 18 hours a day. And then the next slide shows the upstairs components, which is residential in yellow, blue in office, kind of the pink salmon color is senior housing, and the purple portion is the hotel. And then you can see there's the music venue on the second floor of that building in red as well. The next slide, this is really the heart of the SE application. This gets into densities. It gets into mins and maxes for density and phasing. And so in this part of the SE application, there are binding elements that commit us to a minimum on office and hotel and commercial and retail uses, and a maximum for residential uses, as well as a range. And that gives us a little bit of flexibility, but really gives the city what you guys want, which is some certainty as to exactly what's going to ultimately get built and what's going to be brought before you at the SEE. And these numbers marry the interim agreement, or marry up with the interim agreement, I should say. The next slide, these are 3D axonometrics, and so of course, at the next stage, and what we're really excited to do over the summer is really get into building architecture and start thinking about how these are going to look and feel, and which buildings are going to be what colors, and all the fun stuff we're going to do over the next 18 months. But right now, what the SEE application has are largely blocking diagrams to give people a sense of scale, size, building placement. And so this is this shows the full 1.4 million proposed square footage as laid out on the site in view from the high school. And then the next image is in view from Route 7 as a bird's eye looking back towards the high school. And you can see different heights of buildings, undulation of height. You can see one of the nice portions, since our wood frame residential building is the lowest building at the corner, that allows as much sunlight to get onto the main street during the day, especially during the morning and early afternoon hours, which is nice as well. The next slide This is probably the second most important portion of the SE application. There's really three, but there's a number of critical ones, but this is probably the second most important in that this shows the maximum height capacity of the buildings. And so what you had all approved in the zoning was 15 stories in total height. And so the top number is what we've proposed. The bottom number in those circles is the maximum height allowed. And this allows you over the next 90 days, to the extent there are areas that you want to have more control and say, you know, whether, while we would allow that building to go to 15, we'd rather it be 13 or we'd rather it be 10. This would be the slide where we would have those negotiations over the next 90 days. We've already taken down the portion of the senior housing building nearest to the school to 7 stories maximum. And so that's an example of us trying to be responsive. The next slide is a sunshade study. So this is new. It was something that was requested from, I believe, from council or school board. I can't remember, but it was requested. And so this is now in here, and it really does show, with the exception of the winter solstice, which most things are in shadow in the early evening. You can see we've got really great daylighting, certainly during the summer and during the fall and spring equinox, and have very little shadow cast onto the school, with the exception of during the winter solstice in the morning. The next slide is the third most important part of the SE application, which is parking. And so as staff just described, on the upper right is a table, and what we've done is looked at minimum and maximum parking for each use. And in each case, the highlighted yellow, which is the city's current regulations, and in white, what we're asking for. So for example, from an office perspective, we're asking for 3 spaces per 1,000. The city code is 2.22 spaces per 1,000. And so what we're committing to in the SEE is a range of 2.22 to 3.0. And so that gives a maximum, which is what we've asked for, and a minimum that the city desires, and it gives us the flexibility over the next 18 months to figure out exactly what that ratio is going to be. And we've done that for each of the uses, residential, retail, grocery. So the binding elements would be that range of parking, and then this specific parking number would be worked out with all of you during the SEE site plan. The next slides, these next sets of images are the sections through the building, through the streets. These will get more highly developed as we get further along, where you'll start to see the retail kiosk buildings and the furniture pieces and everything else that would be within those public spaces and bring them alive. But for now, it's really more for sense of scale and for how transportation will function within the plan. The unique part about this design is we obviously have separated northbound traffic going towards the metro and southbound traffic into 2 one-way paired streets with the park in the center space. And the nice thing what that does is it slows down the cars in both directions by narrowing up those lanes instead of having a 2-way traffic situation. It also makes it a little bit easier for pedestrians to walk across the street because they only have to look in one direction as they're crossing, as long as somebody's not driving the wrong direction. We put the bike lanes on the inside along the park, and that's for 2 reasons. Number one, so they have better access to bike parking, which will have the bike stands within the park space. And secondly, so that they're not up against the cars and getting doored as people open their driver's side door as they're driving on those bike lanes. Those bike lanes will hopefully continue north all the way to the metro, and so will provide a really great link from Route 7 all the way to the metro, and then also to the east-west connection going to the high school and the middle school. The next slide, I won't go through each of these in detail, but in the package you'll see sections of every single street that we've proposed. So we've added a few since our initial presentation to a few months ago. This is for Route 7 and for Haycock Road, so the big public spaces surrounding the site. The next slide has both Street A and Street B, which will have names at some point. Street A is being named by the city and by the high school, I should say, and Street B is a name that we'll ultimately come up with once they've selected their first name. Street A is probably the most interesting. I had that backwards, sorry. Street A is our street. Street B is the school street. Street B is probably the most interesting in that it allows for these a 2-way bike lane cycle track on the north side of the street between the Virginia Tech parcel and the development site to really create a safe and separate from auto traffic way for students to get to school. The next slide is the remaining sections, which we didn't have in our last package. These are up against the proposed parking deck, and it gives you a sense of scale, gives you a sense of the fact that there is a nice big pedestrian sidewalk and street trees on that side as a buffer between the parking deck, and the school. Our next image, these are early, and so we'll get more detail with these over the next 3 months. But this is something we had presented to the schools a few months ago, and it's the idea of doing something that's artistic on the buildings, on the parking garage. So we've requested a meeting with the schools, and we'd like to meet with their art department and actually talk about concepts for what this might look and feel like. And then the goal would be to have some better, more detailed images as part of our project that you get to vote, that you would vote on May. And those would be part of what's called a placemaking and amenity plan. There would be a parking section within that, and that would give a sense to the community and to all of you about what that might look like. The next image is more examples of this type of these types of elements. And to the extent it's done well, which is the biggest concern I'm sure all of you have, it can be amazing and can be something that people come to see what it looks like from far away. And there are examples of garages like that all around the country, where people actually talk about the architecture of the garage in that way. But it really has to be done well, or it will look cheap, and so that's something we'll focus on. The next image is just more of that. These are more banner-oriented versus art on the building that might, depending on who ends up doing the artwork, to the extent the high school students themselves are doing the artwork, that's something where it could be a better way to do it because they can work on it all year and then just bring it up when the time is right and post it onto the building versus doing it in place. The next images go beyond the parking and starts talking about transportation, bike lanes, and you can see the bike access all throughout the site, both along Leesburg Pike, along Street B to the north, as well as on the Commons, and then the spacing of those, the spacing and sizes of those. Next slide. This slide is cafe zones, and so we included this slide because we think it's important that there's flexibility for the restaurateurs, but to make sure that this concept of the cafe spaces being up against the curb in a more Parisian style is something that's in the record and something that is an expectation for the local residents as well as the council. And so we always have a clear zone, in this case 8 feet, for pedestrians on the sidewalks no matter what, but you have your cafe zone either inboard or outboard. Next image is our open space exhibit, which shows all the green space and the size of the park with dimensions. The next slide is a tree exhibit, and go to the next slide. So now we really get into the landscape images. And so the last time we had presented to all of you, we had just hired our landscape architect. She had been on the project for 2 weeks, so things are starting to develop a little bit more detail. And that will continue over the next 12 months. And we're really starting to think about how these spaces break down, the sizes of them, how many people we can fit in different spaces for different events, how we can close up the street to cars and really have larger events in cooperation with the city, what it's like to cross these pedestrian walkways, where the materials might change. And so all of that is work that we need to do, but you're starting to see the images that have been created, and that connection from the plaza space all the way to the high school. On the next slide, this is the northern portion of the Commons closest to the Virginia Tech site, where you have the hotel and the music venue and the other civic spaces. And the idea here is for this to be the most active part of the common space, with a lawn and with great flexible furniture, umbrellas, 4 rows of street trees, and you can kind of see these examples of kiosk buildings in the park to keep it lively. The next image gets into the central space, where we have that the kind of curved street. And we've done that for a few reasons. Number one, it connects through to Street A. It allows for the right dimensions for the design of the blocks around it, where the buildings need to sit. But it creates this slower concept. So as you're entering the pedestrian zone, because of that curve, you know that means I need to slow down a little bit because of the materials that you're driving on, which will be different, won't be asphalt. All of that starts signaling to the driver that you need to be a little bit more careful here, which is extremely important. And it also creates these opportunities where the number 1 and the number 5 are to have sculptural elements, placemaking at the ends of these 2 streets as you're driving and approaching the common space as gateways. The next image is the southern part of the Commons, which really bleeds out onto Leesburg Pike. And here we will have open space, more passive space, heavily landscaped space, stormwater management space. And the idea here is to kind of take you from the Pike, which is a very busy street, and calm you down as you enter the project into something that's more like an oasis. The next slide shows you some images of what that might look like. So very planterly, beautiful landscaping, kind of a signaling to you that you've arrived. Next slides get into placemaking. I won't go into these in detail at all, but the next 3 or 4 slides are just images of events and materials and what we will do over the next 18 months to bring the project alive. And so we will have a set of placemaking and amenity plan, as I've mentioned, which we'll try to get to staff in the next 30 days so everyone can review it prior to getting to May. That will be an 8 to 10 page, 11 by 17 document that will show examples of the types of placemaking we'd like to do on the site. And then that way everybody has a sense when we come back in for SEE about what we're talking about. SEE site plan, what we're talking about. Okay, the next slides, we just keep going. This is our canopy coverage slide, and we start getting into the engineering slides. We can fly through these a little bit until slide number, keep going. That was our utility plan. Sorry, go back 1 slide. There we go, perfect. So go back, I think, to 1 more. Oh, sorry, go forward. Go forward, go back, go forward. There we go, perfect. Sorry. So this slide shows us the auto, bike, and pedestrian flow throughout the entire site. This is when the school is not operating hours, so evenings and weekends, or when they at least don't have the full student capacity. And you can see the 2-way road on School Road that arcs all the way around from Haycock down to Route 7. You could say that Street A is a full 2-way road all the way through to the school, and it actually does connect through to School Road, so somebody can go straight and make a right turn or a left turn at the end of the street there during those hours. And then that little curved area just in front of the school could be a place for Uber pickup, where you can grab your Uber without having it be mixed with all the traffic. The next slide shows what happens when school is in session. The School Road becomes a 1-way street from the Commons all the way down almost to Route 7. You can see the red arrows. And then it still is 2-way at Route 7 in order to allow drop-off for the middle school. The bollards come up at the end of Street A so that cars can't go straight through from Street A to School Road, and that protects because the buses will be there, and the parents would do drop-off in that little circle. So that circle will be paved. It will feel like the public open space, the park space, but it creates a space for the school to do their drop-off in a really nice, easy way for the high school. The next slide shows what would happen when we have events, and so all of that space outlined in red can be closed down. So it's more than an acre. I need to get you the exact square footage. I think it's 1.5 acres, but it really allows us to have a huge event or arts festival in the city and still have access to the parking decks on a weekend. The next image shows the MVTA grant, which we're working on. And so this slide shows everything that we believe is in the grant that we're working with MVTA to confirm. And so that's undergrounding of utilities. It's a hawk signal along Haycock. We're showing traffic lights both at Street A and Haycock, as well as the Commons and Route 7. Streetscape improvements, where the blue dashed line is on Haycock and 7, including in front of Mary Ellen Henderson. And then a rework of the main intersection of Route 7 and Haycock to make that more pedestrian-oriented. We've also shown a pedestrian crossing at Route 7 and Chestnut, so that people who live to the south or businesses who operate to the south can have a safe crossing to get towards the metro. And what you're seeing here is that intersection is a left in to the development if you're going eastbound on Route 7. But it does not allow left turns out of the development or left turns towards Chestnut. So in keeping with the approval that's already happened at the county, where Chestnut becomes a right in, right out with a median, we're still keeping to that so that there aren't as many accidents as there have been at that intersection for a long time. But we are allowing the left turns in, which is critical for the grocery store, for the retail, for the vibrancy of that main street. And then lastly, a portion of our SEE, which are not pictured in these images, was a written portion. And so within that written portion, we have the binding elements that match the interim agreement, which we've negotiated with all of you. We have description about sustainability from stormwater management to our lead commitments. We have affordable housing commitments on that as well. So the written portion is equally important as the imagery. And we look forward to answering any questions that you have on any and all portion of our application and working with you over the next number of months on this project.
Thank you very much for the very detailed and informative presentation. Why don't we go on to council questions, comments? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to say at the outset that I think it's admirable that you are bringing these pieces before us and not waiting until they're all in complete juxtaposition. That some things are clearly older than others, and others show a more nuanced, evolved thinking. For example, this last one that you just showed, easy to see it's not of recent vintage. The other ones are have a lot more detail that are certainly more interest. And so that is a good foundation for my next statement, which is that in all these developments, we've had to urge, we've had to design, we've had to say, hey, why don't you consider doing this? And we're used to all kinds of nonsensical pushback for the most part. And it's really refreshing, I have to say, to see some of that. And I don't want to be trite about it, but is synchronized with our thinking. So at a very early stage, that's very encouraging. So we don't have to suggest things like differences in surface texture, whether it's a pedestrian, automotive interface, and so it's good that you get that. And it's also, electrically controlled bollards are not cheap, but to have you just plant that before us is, again, is very encouraging in the sense that it gives us a sense that you're going to maintain that high degree of finish and function throughout. So at this point is where I'm going to give you an ask, and I'm not going to be shy about that. All the other developments I've seen have had sort of a the boulevard, the urban design piece defines the space, and of course you have that, so it starts to shape how your buildings will react instead of just orthogonal. So what I think you're missing here is what I call entry expression. So somewhere between a downtown Chinatown gate and the Arc de Triomphe, I think you can probably come up with something that we like.
Okay.
So I think that'd be a perfect place for that, and probably you rode that corner a little bit, but I think you probably have the talent, staff, and the vision to bring that out.
Right.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
And that's something we can address in the placemaking amenity plan. We can start thinking about concepts for that intersection.
All right, other comments, Mr. Duncan? If we want to, sure.
Thank you, Evan. The civic space that we talk about, is that an actual space that the city will be, involved in trying to fill and program, or when we say a civic space, it overlays with the music venue? I'm just trying to get a picture of.
Yep, it's a great question.
Can it be a civic center, or is it a civic space?
So the concept was in our interim agreement, part of about 20,000 square feet of space would be held for music venue, for music school, for things that are related and benefit the school community as well as the families that use the school, and bring nightlife and excitement to the city, and spaces that invite the public in. And that also grew out of the desire from the city to have a real meaningful meeting space for large events tied to the hotel, or at least in concert with the hotel. And that's where the music venue idea came from. So it's morphed from kind of a real civic building to really almost an entertainment-oriented building within the project. It would be privately owned and controlled by the development team, but our vision is to coordinate with the city, certainly on events, and certainly to make sure that to the extent there are major city events that want to be hosted in that facility on a somewhat regular basis, that they're happening within the city limits.
Okay, so it really would be a civic meeting / entertainment space, privately controlled, as you say. Okay, that helps. The real big headline activities that are going to go on at this location, when are we rolling those out in terms of your agreements, your arrangements, your LOIs? I'm trying to get some sense of what the public is going to see as we are working on all these SEs.
Yep.
Are we going to, you've got a hotel, you got a grocery, you got the music venue, you've got some kind of marquee retail uses probably.
Mm-hmm.
We're used to, in our other smaller projects, really requiring that as much as possible, those are nailed down before we cast a final vote.
Right.
And so what can you tell us about how that news rolls out?
It's a critical question. So, and I know how the city has done things in the past, and I know how both P.N. Hoffman and EYA, as well as Regency, quite frankly, have done things in projects really successfully as well. So I think there's a commitment to, within the comprehensive agreement and the ground lease, for example, on hotels, to have a list of potential hotel brands that would be acceptable, and that would be a group of hotels upon which we can slot into this project, because we're not far enough along right now to say this is going to be the hotel, although we're talking to numerous hoteliers. By the time we get to site plan, we better have a hotel brand by that point, because we're going to be heavily designing a building specifically for a brand and bringing it to market. But we certainly won't have that by May of this year. Similarly, with the grocery store, we have a vision in mind for the one or two groceries that might make a lot of sense. But we really won't know that until we have a lease worked out over the next however long number of periods. So I think what we'll do is have regular communication with the city about these tenants, and it could be something where we have a regular monthly update with economic development in the city, so that you're plugged into in a lot of this would have to be confidential, because we can't share, obviously, who we're negotiating retail deals with the general public, because we don't want to lose those tenants to other people. But there might be some way to do that in a confidential manner so that the city is up to date on what we're doing. I would say this, for retail to be successful, there needs to be flexibility. And it's one of the hardest things for all of you, because you're accepting flexibility on something that you're most concerned about. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you've done in the past, where you've restricted through binding elements types of tenant categories where you cannot have them, and types of tenant categories you really like to see, things like that are good ideas, so that everybody gets a sense for what the retail mix is going to look and feel like. We will have a merchandising plan as part of the comprehensive agreement as well, so you'll have a sense for the types of tenants. But to the extent we can avoid specifically tying something to a specific tenant, that's extremely important. And I'll say that for a few reasons. Pike and Rose, we had no idea that REI was going to actually work on Rockville Pike for Pike and Rose. We would love to have had REI there. We thought it was a great idea. We pitched it to them for 3 years before they had any interest in coming. And then when they made their decision, it was, within 3 months we had a letter of intent and the deal was happening. But if you had asked me during the site plan process, I would have told you it was going to be a Crate and Barrel. So that type of stuff changes really dramatically and very quickly in the retail world, depending on nothing to do locally. It could be just that at the national level, they've decided that instead of 7 openings this year, they're going to have 5 nationally, and you get cut. And so if you've committed to something as a landlord, you then get into a lot of trouble when you all of a sudden have to backfill that space. So I think we're open to ideas that give you the comfort that we're going to do the right thing. And part of it is you've selected us as a team because of our history and experience of doing really great retail. Right. But I'd be careful about kind of forcing something so that it gives us the flexibility to do the right thing.
Okay. Well, that's all you've said sounds, appropriate. Obviously, you're right. We care about these things, and the earlier we can know with some degree of certainty, the better we are going to be able to support it.
Let me add one more thing real quick. Sorry. The stuff that's, I would say, equally important is everything we're going to be doing within the public spaces. So the Sunday morning classes, the weekday classes, the events we're going to want to have on a regular basis, and we would like to start working on that with the city even today, so that it could be, a year from now we have what we call kind of a place management or place-making plan for the whole site, where that this is the regular cadence of events that we're likely going to have. Those may change over time, but it will give you a sense for how the space will be used. So we're getting to SE approval and you're saying, that's going to be a lawn, you'll know that's a lawn because these are the 7 or 8 things that are going to happen regularly on that lawn throughout the month. So stuff like that can be really helpful.
Okay, I want to let others, have their chance. I just wanted to ask, one thing on architecture, no building in Falls Church can have a backside. That's something that we've learned, in our other developments, and that's a real challenge everywhere, but here especially. On the other hand, this is, because of the street grid, more like a real city. So, in New York, buildings have 4 sides, and many of them do. And so, architecturally, I hope that, that's a challenge that you're up for, and especially as the project, we hope, will move further north beyond your borders and tie in with what's going to happen with Grad Center and the Metro.
Right.
So, we would like to build ours so that it really does not have any backsides, because we hope and expect that to the north and to the Buyer and Federal Realty sides, we will, eventually connect those.
Yep.
This is maybe a question for Wyatt, on the city side. The net fiscal impact numbers that that the staff gave out, 4.88 million net fiscal impact, with sort of the standard student pupil load, and 4.49 with the 50% higher. Is that right? Is that what I heard?
That is correct. There are two things that are varying. There's a range on the net annual fiscal revenue based on pupil generation, and I think there's also some ranges just in terms of the other components in the project, because there are ranges in the SEE. So those are the two variables: the 50% multiplier for pupils, and then the ranges of the uses.
Just on the very rough back of the envelope, so something over $4 million is going to be the net fiscal impact, even if the student load is higher than it's been our experience with the kind of housing that we're looking at putting in up here. Is that
correct?
Roughly correct. Okay, so that's $4 million. That's 10 cents on the tax rate, right, about now. Is that accurate? Is it accurate to say that this revenue, that this development, when fully built out, is going to amount to a 10%, a 10 cent on the tax rate plus from where we are today?
Well, that's one way to look at it, and that's an accurate way to look at it, and that's modeling.
Right.
The other way to look at it is the way that this deal is structured, that the capitalized lease payments are the city's first 6 years of payment on debt service for the high school. And once those lease payments cease, the net fiscal impact needs to step in its place. And that is how we were planning to finance the high school.
All right. I'm obviously not trying to spend that 10 cents. I'm just trying to convey to the public that this is a project that we do expect will meet the debt service cost without any further impact on the tax rate as we see things right now.
Yes, because of the actions the council has already taken to
There's a build-in.
to build the reserves and to build some capacity in the tax rate. That is correct.
Okay. There was one other question, if I can remember what it is. Oh, affordable housing. We haven't talked about that at the last couple of meetings, but I just want to make sure we put a oar in the water for workforce housing, affordable housing, micro units, something that will create housing opportunities for younger folks, older folks, people who, maybe don't have a place in the city right now, or maybe people have a place in the city and they want to downsize.
Right.
That's an important component of this, and I'm sure when you go to boards and commissions and talk to the Housing Commission and others, that will come out, but that is something that I would like us to talk about, because that's a real plus of this project. Okay, I think that's enough from me for now. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thank you. I'll cut Mr. Duncan's questions in like half the amount of time. So my first question, it relates to that picture is not the picture that we're actually dealing with right now, right?
No, we should go back to the SEE site plan. One of the first, like the fourth or fifth slide. Yeah, one forward, keep going, forward. Oh, that's good, that's fine.
That's good. That's fine. Yeah, yeah. So last week when we were talking about this, Ms. Hardy mentioned the corner of Leesburg Pike and Haycock Road, and just that's an important corner. And I know these things are evolving as we go, but I do want to make sure that we say to you in as many ways as possible that that does need to be a signature corner of this project, because it's going to be visible from far, far, far down Leesburg Pike. So it shouldn't just be a afterthought of the grocery store or a wraparound of the parking garage.
Yep. Yep, we completely understand that.
Okay, that's good. And then the other thing I just want to say, and I know we talked about this last week too, is that as we've talked about these different blocks, you've said that they may change within their block. So Block C, for example, that has the music venue and the hotel,
Right.
has changed from your original submission. It may continue to change as we go forward, in addition to height, the actual placement of the buildings.
Yeah, so the whole concept is another, thank you for asking that question, actually. And we use these examples. I base this a little bit on the Montgomery County process that they have there for zoning, which is similar to what you've enacted here. And there's a great example there where the central block of Pike and Rose was originally supposed to be an office and residential building. It ended up being a 200-unit hotel, which we moved from another block, and the office building swapped with that block, and the condos ended up on top of the hotel because we had 20 stories there versus at the bottom. And that was over a similar period. We got an approval, and then over the next 2 years, as we worked through the specifics of the plan and we found the hotel operator and we figured out exactly what we're going to do, we went back and asked the planning board to make those modifications. So any changes that were to happen here would be within the bounds of the binding elements of the SCE and would be with planning commission staff and your support. So the good news is we're not saying we're going to get this approval and then just do whatever we want. But it is important to have that flexibility because, for example, we might find, bless you, as we start interviewing hotel companies, right now we think that is the perfect block for the hotel for a number of reasons. It's the only block that doesn't directly attach to parking, which for hotel works. You can be across the street. You don't have to be directly in the parking, especially if you have valet. It's going to be one of the lower buildings that we're going to build, and so that makes sense up against the high school. But to the extent we find the best hotel company in the world that wants to do a project here, and they will only do it if they're on Route 7, then we're going to have to come back to you and say, we'd like to try to move that. And you may say, no, sorry, that's not going to work, and that would be the answer.
Okay. And then the other thing is, as you go along Haycock, obviously that's still under planning as well. But
Right.
because we expect that the Federal Realty property across the street will eventually develop, we would like to have a nice boulevard there along
Agreed.
Haycock as well, with retail facing on both sides.
Got it. And so
As
what
we
we
go.
so that what I would say is right now the concept is for that main corner to be a big signature retail or some piece, hopefully, and then to have residential entrance and common space on the first floor going up towards Street A. We don't have retail spaces right there, so that's something we can talk about. We would then have retail again at Street A in the Phase 2 building as we deliver the Phase 2 buildings, especially if Federal Realty develops across the street and there's something to attach to. More importantly, we want to have a traffic light at Street A
Right.
and Haycock, which really directly connects to their property. So when they are ready for development, there really can be that continuation, which is really important.
Right. Okay. And then the other thing that just has come to mind as I've looked at all of this is that our boards and commissions are really excited to take a look at this. All of the ones that I'm a liaison on are ready. They're reviewing and they're planning, and they're going to have some good questions for you. And I feel like we've done this so many times in recent years that people know the right kind of questions to ask, and they're ready to really dig their hands into it as well. So
Yeah, we're really excited as well. We've been looking forward to it, and we'll get better as we go because we have one every day for 14 days in a row. At day 14, it's going to be like, I'm going to have it down.
Carly has streamlined it a bit for you.
She has, Carly. Yeah, actually, thank you, Carly. Carly took the typical schedule because it's so condensed and has combined a bunch of them. It's actually amazing. I will. Yeah, exactly. It's great. It's 6 instead of 16. So we do appreciate it. I was just joking. I will be at the vast majority of them. I won't be at every single one of them because I have one or two conflicts, but you'll get to hear other people from our team presenting also, which will be great. It won't just be me up here speaking.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Great. I had a lot of comments and questions last week, so I'm not going to regurgitate all of them. And since I'm like fourth in the list here, a couple things. One, I wanted to call out my thanks to Ms. Aubrey and Ms. Ruzzi for actually so diligently capturing all of our comments from last week. Often we make comments and we feel like it goes out to somewhere. And so I appreciate that they're on paper and memorialized, and that hopefully the applicant will also be responsive to the comments we've made thus far. I did want to call out kind of my top three, which I think folks have reiterated. I think we talked about the location of the retail, so making sure that the project is not only interior facing, but also forward thinking, thinking about making sure that we have interfaces on the exterior. On that point, though, making sure there's also connections between the sites to the north of us and to the east of us, thinking about redevelopment hopefully down the road. Tapering the hotel or the music venue adjacent to the schools is going to be really important. I think several of us called out the impact of the shadow study on both the middle school and the high school. I think several of us also prefer the original version where it was flipped, where I think the music civic space was kind of facing the schools and having the hotel kind of set closer to the commons area. So I'll look to you all to kind of continue iterating on that. But I think whatever tapering, I think that kind of reduces the impact and shadows on the school, I think would be the preferred one.
Okay.
On the topic of commitments and what's exactly what we're going to get, I didn't notice that in this version we're getting kind of the list of prohibited uses for retail like we normally do. Is that something that we should expect in the next round?
It would be in the SE, in the ground lease, in the comprehensive agreement and ground lease, we would have that.
I think we have a pretty good list of what we like and we don't like, as you mentioned earlier, so I think I'd like to see that too.
I think, why, is that correct, or am I wrong? Or Carol?
I think likely we're going to end up wanting to build that into the voluntary concessions that get written. I think we don't have those in there yet, but when that comes in, I think that's where they'll go. The ground lease, we're planning to leave a little bit more referring to all the things in the SEE.
We already talked about parking ratios. I look forward to more data on that. And then Mr. Duncan talked about workforce housing. I think this is a big opportunity for us to think more creatively about affordable housing, especially workforce. So those are kind of the summary of my top 5 or so. On the note of thanks, though, I did want to also thank the boards and commissions for really compressing their schedule. Like I said, instead of 16 meetings, they're doing 6.
Yeah, that's great.
So it requires a lot of commitment from everybody. A question for staff, though. We've gotten very little public comment on this one, and for a project that is probably the most impactful and significant project in the city and our compressed schedule, I think it really emphasizes that I think public comment is really important. We want to make sure we hear from people, and we've done a really good job, I think, having the Sunday series meetings. And so I kind of put an open question out to staff on how we can do a better job of kind of reaching people. I'm not sure whether people are just trusting that we're doing a really good job.
Yes, that's it.
But on that point, though, board and commission comments will be more important than ever because of that, because it's our only kind of opportunity to kind of hear from more people other than the 7 of us. And so I would kind of put a question out to staff whether there's more creative ways to engage the community, because we do want them to chime in. Even though we're looking at the 10,000-foot view, I want to make sure people are paying attention to this and have an opportunity to shape the project before we get to the 1,000-foot view.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I almost said this at the beginning, and I never stick to the notes that I write, so I missed it. But, you know, this is probably the, 15th project of this that I've worked on in my career in various jurisdictions around the region. And what's so unique is because you guys did so much work in advance for years on all of this in order to get the bond approved. It seems like the whole community is relatively aware of what's happening already, because I agree, a meeting like this, typically you would see 300 to 400 people in an audience on a project of this scale. But the sense is every single person I talk to is fairly familiar with what's going on. So it's actually how these processes should work, where the jurisdiction does so much of the legwork and upfront work at a master planning level that when the project comes in, as long as it's meeting with what the request was, people aren't surprised by it. But no, I mean, it really is. It's unique. Every single person on our team has commented nonstop about how different this process has been from any other jurisdiction we've worked on.
Us, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the point. It's early. We want to hear from them early, right?
And we are happy to do. And if there's any other recommendations on how we can reach the community, we're happy to do it too. And we have some ideas too, if you want to work together on that.
If you all have ideas on what's worked well in other places, we'd love to hear them too. So, but thank you. I think I am ready to support this at first reading.
Thanks.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, the constant debate around this one of too much transparency, not enough transparency. So maybe we've struck a good balance here on that.
Right.
Which is why you see so many empty chairs back there. Just a couple questions, but one comment to echo Ms. Hardy's remarks that, thank you to staff as well as the developer for providing written responses from the voluminous questions that were asked at last work session, so it was great to see that. This question around retail and some of the more prominent corners, can you give me your thoughts generally, and not to hold you to this, but thinking about retail at street level along Leesburg Pike, there's some folks that have voiced comments about making sure that this is a 360-degree project, both internally and externally, so it's not internally facing, and making sure that we've got a retail component or at least something that's more inviting on the exterior of the project. Can you comment about Leesburg Pike specifically?
Yeah, so our intention on Leesburg Pike, we think Leesburg Pike works quite well, especially, well, I'd say there's two parts of Leesburg Pike. There's the hill, which is a little bit more difficult from a retail perspective, but that's where we'll have our largest anchor. And we actually are working through right now where the entrance to that anchor would go and how it would kind of most activate that streetscape in that frontage, and where, to the extent that grocery store has outside tables and a marketplace, how that might work to really enliven Route 7. So we think that works quite well. And the debate that we're having internally, quite frankly, is whether the entrance to the store would be at Haycock and 7, or if it's better to be mid-block, almost at the Commons, not all the way to the Commons, but mid-block, with the idea that that might better activate the other retail that's going to be in the project versus having it kind of divorced from the retail at the other corner. So we're working through all of those ideas right now, and we'll come back to you, at site plan with where we think we're headed. So, but we think that will be lively, and glass and open and retail oriented. So it feels like a great storefront and kind of a signage or a banner for this tenant. The other part of it is relatively flat as you get underneath the office building, so that will work quite well. And we've talked even about the idea at the corner of Block A and Commons Drive of turning a tenant or two towards Leesburg Pike, or at least having a corner tenant that wraps fully towards the grocery store as well. So that we want, as much as you want, for this to be a beacon for the project all along Leesburg Pike. That's really critical. And then the kind of main streety retail, the outdoor cafe seating, all that would be within the main Commons Drive. Haycock is the port that's a little bit more difficult, in that depending on what happens across the street long term, it could actually be good retail space later. And so one idea we've talked about there was, and this Federal Realty did this actually in Bethesda Row, where they built a residential project above retail, and there was a portion of it, Arlington Road, that wasn't as prime retail space. And so they started it as common space for the residential building, but it had enough ceiling height that when the time was right, they could convert a corner to restaurant space, which they did. And so that might be a good solution for the Haycock Street A corner, and that might be something that is a big living room space for the residential building today, but could be a retail space in the future as something happens across the street and that becomes more pedestrian oriented.
Okay. Yeah, I'm generally, supportive of the idea of this being as inviting as it can be on all four sides, or however many sides you have to that project. But I just am sensitive to the fact that I don't want, well, at least from my standpoint, I'm not speaking for others, but I, for one, want to make sure we don't over-prescribe retail for the sake of just having storefronts. I've seen, we've one project in particular that I feel fell victim to that, which was Tenor Hill. We've got a lot of empty retail bays because that seemed to be overprescribed to me. But I want to be sensitive to that fact that we can find that balance. You guys are the experts, so I look forward to hearing what solutions you come up with. Has there been given any thought to kind of thematic kind of neighborhoods inside of the project? And I'll refer to the wharf. I mean, the wharf itself kind of gels as a whole. It all kind of works together. But I do have this feeling when I walk through there that you've got slightly different feel in terms of neighborhoods between, with the alleyways and where the Anthem is. Is there any thought that's been given to how you guys structure that? Not just from an architectural perspective, obviously different treatments on the exterior and skin of the building, but have you given any thought to some of those themes and what that might look like?
Yeah, so we are kicking off, in 10 days, we're kicking off our placemaking and amenity process, which will be, have heavy involvement from the very tops of all of our organizations. And so Monty Hoffman from P. & Hoffman, really, that's one of the things he cares a lot about and was heavily involved with at the Wharf, Bob Young and Todd at EYA as well. So that will start in about 10 days, and then we will start interacting with you about those types of ideas. What I'd say here, this is 10 acres. So I think where you'll see the neighborhood differentiation, there probably will be maybe 2 or 3 types of neighborhoods within the 10 acres, but where you'll really feel it is as this becomes the larger 35-acre site going all the way back to the metro. And so we based upon what we've heard from what Virginia Tech hopes to do, it sounds like that will feel obviously more like an academic campus with some retail as well. The WMATA site has an opportunity for some additional retail that could create its own vibe back there, maybe a little lower density. And so I think the goal is for all of that to feel like a neighborhood, whether it's in the city or the county, and then also strike out towards Federal Realty and to what happens across the street of the buyer site. And so the goal would be you'd have these kind of 10 or 12 places where the architecture is a little different or the retail mix is a little different, exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
So we're not far enough along yet, but yeah. We'll
I understand.
work on all that.
I'm excited to see that. I mean, this is really the fun part of the project when you get into the nitty gritty aspect of this. And I know that things are still evolving between SC and SP. But just on that question, I have it written down, but it made me think about it. On the WMATA site, is there any insight that you can provide to us as a developer involved in this project in terms of your communication with what's happening at WMATA?
Yeah, so WMATA's board approved in January an RFQ that would go out to 2 teams only, so the Rush Market team as well as the EYAP and Hoffman Regency team. And so we've had an introductory meeting with them about 2 weeks ago where they walked both teams through the RFQ, and that RFQ will likely be issued shortly. And so there is a lot of coordination going on and on that front. And as part of that process, our team and the Rushmark team have met as well. So we're working towards making sure that there'll be coordination on the whole thing, whether we're the developer of the WMATA site or not. And then secondly, March 22nd, right, 9:30 to 12 will be a meeting with Virginia Tech and our entire team and the Rushmark HIT team to start talking about infrastructure and uses and streets and all that with the city.
Okay. Do you guys feel comfortable that if you didn't win through that RFQ process, that the coordination with the Rushmark HIT team and WMATA would still be fairly fluid and coordinated? You feel good about that?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, no
That's
question.
good to know. Just a couple last one on that particular issue, and we had talked about it, and I know that was addressed in here, but I'm interested to see more of the design about the connectivity between this site and Virginia Tech and HIT, and if there are any issues that we have to address as city or council to get involved. Would certainly like to know about that in advance because I think that's incredibly important. I know you guys agree. I'm probably preaching to the choir on that. A question for staff. The net fiscal impact that was outlined here in this report, does that include some type of amortization or recognition for that capital event fee? Do we know that? It's not included?
It does not. That's
okay.
correct.
So I think it's important because that is going to be significant over the long run. It may not necessarily be a net fiscal impact generated from the revenues, but when you add that in, given the number of times that condos will turn over, the number of times that this project may or may not refinance or sell, I think it's important for the community to realize that we are talking net fiscal impact from the revenues that we typically can kind of touch, feel, and see on a regular basis. But certain mechanisms like that are a little bit out of the ordinary will be tremendously accretive to the revenue and the tax coffers to the city, but aren't necessarily picked up in this report. So when folks look at developments apples to apples, they need to recognize that, again, there are other mechanisms that have been agreed to and negotiated into this deal that will be far and away significant and substantial and beneficial to the city beyond that. Just a quick specific technical point. The directional traffic changes that you guys are modeling in the presentation here for the school, as well as the automated mechanical bollards, who actually manages that?
The schools. So
schools
that most of that came from the schools, actually, of how they want to operate the school.
Okay.
And then we've been responding to them.
Excellent. All right. And then one more ask for you guys. One of the things that's really exciting me about this project and some of the conversations that I've heard you guys having related to landscaping, it's great that you brought on your landscaper. One of the asks that I have is just to really think above and beyond with some just extraordinary landscaping, which can absolutely transform a project. And when I think walking around this project, doing something that again is really outside of the box, that really draws in, is very green, very lush, very diverse, I think is what was really going to put kind of a bow on this entire project. So I would ask you guys to think just crazy on extraordinary landscaping for this project. And then the last comment that I'll make around the net fiscal impact, I, for one, I do look at this as cents on the tax rate, and I look at this project, again, not only transformative for the city from a development perspective, but I, for one, am committed to trying to find a way for us to lower the tax rate through this project. This is very much going to change the dynamic between our commercial and residential tax base. So I, for one, if I'm around long enough, will be pushing to find ways off the back of the revenue of this project to lower our property tax rate, because I think this is the kind of shot in the arm that we need. So I'm going to go on record with that this is the chance of a lifetime for us to be able to do that. And so I want to make that known. So thank you guys very much.
Great. Before I give my comments, I just want to ask if anyone in the audience would like to speak. Is there any public comment on this project? All right, seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Let me give a few comments. Some of these I made before, but I'm going to go ahead and give them to you one more time. I, for one, am one of those folks who believes that we should have retail on Haycock Road for a lot of reasons. But I think ultimately we want to draw people into this place and not just have them sort of come in through discrete entrance ways, but around the whole periphery of the project. And I'm confident the Fritt project will redevelop at some point, but it may be a while. But I'd hate to be nearsighted and just say, hey, it's not here now. We don't need to put retail on Haycock. And it may be that it's not the ideal location for really strong retail. Maybe it's a service retail. But I think having those spots there and thinking for that and having some good windows, fenestration, lighting, so that people are drawn into it is appropriate. I do feel Mosaic does not do that job. It really, once you arrive inside, it's great, but when you're on the outside, it's like a fortress. Very few windows, mostly just solid walls, which I think is really not good urban planning. So I have a hope and expectation that we would see a lot of windows, if we can have some outdoor seating, some other things that really signal that this is an inviting place on all sides. I think over time, the buyer property in Fritt will come on strong, and this will really be good for that. Let's see what else I've got here. I probably have to put on my glasses. The garage, I mean, the images we saw look like precast concrete with banners on it, which I think we need to really upgrade. This is the entrance to our school, to a major civic building, and so I would have a hope and expectation that we would really use some high-quality materials and not, unfinished concrete or painted white concrete, but really have a really high-quality garage facade. I haven't seen those yet in the images, but that would be my hope, is that we're going to see some really high-quality, innovative design for the garage. I'm a little concerned about how the public will go eastbound on 7. And I understand why there's not a left turn out of your main boulevard. But I do think that a lot of thought and care needs to go into getting people eastbound 7, because it looks like there's really not many ways other than going out to Haycock and hanging a right to go left on. And so I don't know how much stacking you're going to have. If you have some big group of people coming out, it may be challenging. Yeah. So I don't know what kind of redesign. Are you, Mr. Shields, involved in any reconsideration of Haycock in terms of how it might function, or is that too early for all that? It's a lot of people. I mean, it's backed up now with the high school, let alone 1.5 million square feet of people. That's not there right now. I mean, the high school alone can stack that thing up with the normal traffic, so that it's backed up for way beyond your street A. Right. So, look, I don't have a solution for you, but I think I know what the problem's going to be. And so I would just say it really is going to require some good thought on how to resolve that. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm sure hopefully you guys will get there. I would say, too, Mr. Shields, we talked about commitments, the written narrative portion of this. I presume staff is looking very carefully to make sure all the things we talk about that are important are actually in writing. The bottom line, our hope, I think, is our expectation that the significant things we agree and discuss will be commitments from you, but not just an idea or a hope or a goal, but actually written commitments, because we found even with written commitments, sometimes it's challenging to get what I think is kind of the benefits of the bargain. So that would be at least what I would be expecting. Have you had any direct conversations with Fritt recently about this actual design? In other words, and how about Mr. Shields? Are they aware of where things are? I mean, they may be sort of coincidentally, but has anyone reached out to them to make sure, for example, Street A lines up with their depth of buildings that they would anticipate in the future, how it might work on a street alignment?
It's a good point. We have not had interaction with Fritt for some months.
So I would recommend, frankly, both of you all reach out to Frit in short order, because what I'd hate to do is design a street that the expectation is will line up to where they want it to be on the other side, and it turns out that their depth of building is greater or less or whatever it might be. And so
We did take that into account when we came up with it, but I'm happy to sit down with them as well.
yeah, their ideas may not be the same as yours. I know you used to work there. Maybe they probably are. But I do think that is a conversation that's worth having. And I think for a lot of reasons, it's good for everybody. So I would certainly encourage not only Virginia Tech and WMATA, but Frit and the buyers for that matter as well. Has any conversations been had with the buyer family recently?
We are talking with the buyer family, but generally on, what they're doing on their property kind of immediately. They're very aware of what this proposal is. We just haven't really gone through it in detail with them, but I do know they're aware of it.
Maybe a sit-down meeting with you all and both of those interested neighbor parties, and maybe city staff would be a good idea to not just coordinate things, but just make sure everybody's on board, and they may have their own comments or suggestions, and I think now would be the time to give them. I presume you're going to have retail on your ground floor of your office building as well?
Yep.
Okay, good. In the past for new projects, we've had walking tours, which I think would something we ought to consider here as well. I know it's kind of hard to do that with a school, but I do think there's some benefit to actually getting on the ground and walking things and feeling the grade and sort of eyeballing things. So I think maybe we could give some consideration with council's concurrence to maybe doing a walking tour coming up. Let's see what else we've got here. There was one section that I saw last week that had a 6-foot sidewalk. I can't remember which one it was, and I'd written down, like you, I don't always follow my notes, but 6 feet seems a bit tight. And so I don't know if you recall where that was, but I would maybe suggest taking a look and seeing if there is any way to get that just a touch bigger. 6 feet seems pretty tight for a commercial.
I think I'll take a look at that. I think most of them were 6 plus a 2-foot space in front of the retail, so 8. But I'll confirm that.
Gotcha. And it may be that I'm just remembering things. Something else maybe to give some consideration is public art. I imagine there are places for that here, and I don't know what your thoughts or expectations are, what you might do, but there's certainly Falls Church is becoming more of an arts and culture community and with a thriving art scene, and so there may be ways to incorporate either local artists or just in general art as part of this project. Is that something you were considering?
Yeah, so the placemaking and amenity plan will handle 7 or 8 topics. One is fountains, one is art and sculpture, one is lighting, one is canopies and retail signage, benches and furniture, landscaping. So each of those will have an 11 by 17 page with precedent images, and then we would, as we go through the SEE, we would actually commit to certain specific things, like we will have 4 benches on this street that will generally look like these. We'll have 6 benches here that will generally look like these. We'll have major artwork pieces in these 4 locations. So that's the type of stuff we would do at site plan with all of you.
Great.
And to the extent, actually, we'd love to use local art. That's always great to the extent. So just point us in the right direction at the right time to who the best people in the community are for us to start talking to.
Okay, that's
Because
great.
the earlier we engage people, the better on that stuff.
I think that'd be a great idea. And I know Mary Beth Connolly is actively involved, and Barb Cram, who's in the audience as well. And so I think we can connect you with the right people. Excuse me?
There's the date where you're going to see the Arts and Humanities Council. I'm certain that will come up as a
perfect.
topic.
All right, let's see what else I've got here. I would say as far as retail goes, we've had these lists of prohibited uses, but they've been so kind of crazy that they never really realistic, like no tattoo parlors and things like that. So I guess to my mind, a better use would be what you want to do or what we're agreeing that you're going to do as opposed to what you're not going to do. I've never found those not going to do lists useful at all. So I think, at least personally, I would focus more on what your intentions are as opposed to what your intentions are not. Let's see if there's anything else I have. Let me just take a quick look at my notes. I think that's it. I guess I would just close with thanking everyone. And I know it's been an extraordinary amount of time. The public may not be aware of how much time has gone in to get us to where we are now, but it's an extraordinary amount of time, particularly by staff. I know you and your team as well. You have a whole row or two of people here tonight, and so we appreciate that, and we know how expensive that is. So we thank you for that. But our staff also has been working quite hard. You've got two of them right there in the audience, so our hats off to you for the good work you've done, and we've got two more over here. So thanks to everybody in our community as a whole for getting us to where we are today. But I intend, of course, to support this evening. So,
Wonderful.
And Mr. Z?
I know you're wrapping up your thank yous, but I do have another ask, and I was going to wait until you met with the board and commission. But why wait until then when you're on television? You've got the entire council here. You've got your entire team here. So I've got maybe mixed feelings on what might go on this parking garage, and so let me just start with what I would like to see. And if you know the work of Living Walls and Green Walls, in particular, the premier example is in Paris at the Musée de Quai d'Orsay.
Right.
And Patrick Blanc is the French designer. So it's more than just getting a bunch of plants and throwing them up the wall. It's actually doing this in consonance with how you lay out your voids and solids, and I think that could be, in my mind, preferable to some big red horse on the side of the building. So, I mean, there are fans of those as well, but I'm not one of them. I think you know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
All right. Well, unless there are any other comments, why don't we see if there's a motion? Mr. Duncan.
Mr. Mayor, I move to refer TR 19-08 to the School Board, Planning Commission, Architectural Advisory Board, Economic Development Authority, Housing Commission, Human Services Advisory Council, Environmental Sustainability Council, Tree Commission, Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, Recreation, and Parks Advisory Board, Arts and Humanities Council of Falls Church, Library Board of Trustees, Historical Architectural Review Board, Historical Commission, Village Preservation and Improvement Society, and the Greater Falls Church Chamber of Commerce for review and recommendations to City Council, and schedule and advertise according to the law a public hearing for May 28th, 2019.
I may have missed one of the commissions. Did you? All right.
Second.
Do we have a second? Ms. Hardy on the second. Madam Clerk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Charter?
Yes.
And the motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Vice Mayor Connolly's got a question.
It's just a thought that all of those hearings for boards and commissions are also open to the public as well, correct? So that might be a way to advertise to the community that there are all these dates where people can come and attend if they'd like to.
All right. Thank you. Now let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda, unless I'm missing something. Excuse me?
Nothing's on consent.
There is nothing on the consent. Good work. Good work, Councilwoman Connell or Hardy. All right, let's go on to other business that's not on the consent agenda or any other agenda. Do we want to go ahead to that, Miss?
Yes. Our first item is authorize the city manager to execute an agreement of sale and such other documents as may be necessary and in the city's interest to complete the city purchase of the Fellows property for the price of $4,671,110.
All right, Mr. Shields, anything new to add?
Ms. McCoskey?
Ms. McCroskey, anything new to add?
The only thing that I will say that's new is we were advised that there are some personal effects still in the house, and so we are going to move ahead, get the agreement all signed, but we may put off actually submitting the final order to the court for a couple weeks to give the family time to get in and remove things they want. So but we would like authority to go ahead and sign this agreement, which has already been signed on behalf of the trust, so that we've nailed down the price. We will subtract any past due taxes, penalties, and interest, and then we will hold off for a couple weeks submitting the order to the court.
All right, thank you for the update. Any member of the public or the member of the public here wish to speak to this matter? Seeing that he does not, the matter is closed to the public. Any council comments? I would just add that this is, I think, great that we're adding some more open space to the city. Another piece of the puzzle, another part of council's commitment to make this a better, fuller community. So I'm very happy to vote in favor of this acquisition. Do we have a motion?
Here. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, do we have a motion?
I move to authorize the city manager to execute an agreement of sale and such other documents as may be necessary and in the city's interest to complete the city purchase of the Fellows property for the price of $4,671,000 and $110.
Second.
Second.
We have 3 seconds.
3
Mr. Z on
seconds?
the second. Yeah, you win. All right.
Yes,
Madam
first.
Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes?
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
No.
Mr. Z,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-1. Thank you, council.
Thank you. Let's move on.
We have authorized the city manager to execute an amendment to the existing lease with Fairfax Water for the use of the property yard for an additional 5-year term.
Mr. Shields?
The city has leased the portion of the property yard, approximately 2 acres of it, to Fairfax Water since the sale of the water system in 2014. Fairfax Water is in the process of building a new property yard facility in the Merrifield area of Fairfax County. They have asked for an extension of their current lease for an additional 5 years. This authorization would give me authority to execute such an extension. The lease terms provides an increase in the annual rent from the current $182,000 per year to a rate of $230,000 per year with a 2% escalation for each year of the 5-year lease term. There are a few other technical updates we'll make to the lease that the city attorney is working through with us, and that's the staff report.
All right. Any questions? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? No, Thomas said no. The matter is closed to the public. Do we have any council comments, questions? If not, let's go to a motion. Yeah, of course.
I just want to confirm that the homeless shelter will remain on that site.
Yes, the homeless site, it will remain on site and is excluded from this lease.
Very good, thank you.
All right, do we have a motion?
Mayor, move to authorize the city manager to execute lease amendment to extend the property yard lease to Fairfax Water for an additional 5-year term on the terms set forth in this staff report after approval as to the form by the city attorney. Who wrote this?
City attorney. All right, do we have a second?
You didn't trust me. That's right. Second.
All right, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Mr. Z,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
All right, any business not on the agenda? Any standing regional committee or council liaison? You're going to leave already? Look, we're on the home stretch, man. Give me 3 minutes, I'll get you out of here. Any council liaison reports? Regional committee, all right, Vice Mayor Connolly.
Yeah, Government Operations Committee that was scheduled for tomorrow has been canceled.
All right, any other reports?
Can I ask about the downtown Park Plaza, Mr. Shields? Are we on track for a Arbor Day opening, and how's the naming process going?
Well, I think we've got. Let me follow up with you after this meeting. I'd need to get a few more facts on it.
All right, any other?
The EDC will meet on Thursday. Perhaps we can talk about it then, if not sooner.
All right, Mr. Z.
The COG last week voted to approve the standing up of a subcommittee under the Committee for Climate, Energy, Environmental Policy Committee to look holistically at trees in the region on both public and private lands. Tacoma Park is looking at rewriting their ordinance that would affect both those components. So hopefully this will get a lot of quick traction. I'm not interested in permanent subcommittee, but hopefully get done within 2 years. I mean, that's the time frame we set up.
Sounds
Got a lot
good.
of resonance with other committees, obviously, especially with the Region Forward.
Great. All right, anything else? Okay, let's go on to any council member comments. All right, I think we just had them. Approval of minutes. Eagle-eyed Duncan.
Mr. Mayor, I found the minutes to be dandy as to form. I move to approve the minutes of the December 10th, 2018 meeting as presented.
Second? We have a second? We have a third? All right, so, all right, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have. You weren't in the minutes? We'll stick you in there.
You were business.
All right.
You were business
All right,
traveler.
all right. So we got an abstention, one abstention. All right, anything else before we adjourn?
Dan?
I don't know
right.
what you all did when I wasn't here. Move to adjourn me.
Let's do it. We're out of here.
We left it open. There was no sunny day, really. We were just...
We've been here for 2